Chapter 26. George, Luna, Colin, and Ginny. The history of basilisks is too long and has long been banned by the Ministry of Magic, so few books mention this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like the scimitar horned Snorlax, wizards do not believe this magical animal exists, but my father was lucky enough to see it once in Sweden. The girl tilted her head and replied. What is a Snorlax? Colin's face was full of curiosity. The girl explained. It's a magical animal with special horns, but it can't fly. Okay, that should be the poison-horned beast. By this time George already knew the identity of the girl, Luna Lovegood. Her father was Xenophilius Lovegood, the editor-in-chief of the Quibbler magazine, and her mother was Pandora Lovegood, who died accidentally when she was 9 years old while experimenting with spells. It can be seen that without sufficient theoretical foundation of magic, creating new spells is also a very dangerous thing. Because his family was well educated, what Luna said about the eagle owl might be true, but about the Cyrano-horned Snorlax, he knew that Xenophilius had made it up to comfort his daughter. The so-called curved horned snorkel is actually a poison-horned beast, and its special horn is also in danger of exploding. There are still seats here. Let me help you put your luggage on the rack. Because he wanted to learn more knowledge from Luna that was not in the books, George took the initiative to get up and help her move the luggage on the cart to the shelf above. Thank you, my name is Luna Lovegood. Luna was also very interested in the eagle owl, so she did not refuse, but she couldn't help but let out a sigh when she saw the thin and frail George lifting her luggage to the high shelf very easily. You are so strong. After Luna sat down, the three chatted again. But mainly Colin, who was as curious as a baby, was asking, Luna was answering, and George was listening quietly. He would only ask questions when he encountered knowledge that interested him. Woo! The long whistle sounded and the train was about to leave. At this time, the sliding door of the box was suddenly opened, and a girl with thick, fiery red hair, bright brown eyes, and a face as delicate and cute as a doll walked in. Is there anyone here? She asked, pointing to the seat next to Luna. Everywhere else is full. No, you can sit next to me. Luna smiled softly. The girl was visibly relieved when she heard this. Because her brothers were the last to board the train, she certainly wouldn't admit that she almost forgot the magical notebook. Little Ginny, we're here to help you. At this time, a pair of identical red-haired twin boys walked in. They happily helped their sister pack her luggage, and then left in a noisy manner when her sister was driven away by her disgust. Hello everyone, my name is Ginny, Ginny Weasley. After driving away the two troublesome brothers, Ginny sat next to Luna and introduced herself generously. She was not a shy person, except in front of Harry. Luna Lovegood. Colin Creevy. George. The three of them also introduced themselves. George, you have the same name as my brother, one of the two just now. He is also called George, George Weasley. By the way, what's your last name? Just call me George. George smiled and didn't explain much. Although his pronunciation of George and George Weasley's George are the same, there are essential differences. George Weasley's surname is Weasley and his first name is George, but his surname is actually Joe, and his first name is G, which means governing. His father hoped that he could become an official and govern a country in the future, so he took this name. So actually, according to the name here, he should be called George Chiao. It's just that he thought it sounded too awkward, so when he told people, he just called him George. Ginny, how many brothers do you have in your family? At this time, the kind-hearted Colin suddenly changed the topic. He felt that George, as an orphan, probably didn't want people to know his last name. Ginny didn't think much, stretched out her hands and bent 4 fingers. 6. Bill is a curse breaker in Gringotts, Egypt, Charlie is a dragon tamer in Romania, Percy is in 6th grade, George and Fred are in 4th grade, you just watched, Ron. So much. Hearing Ginny's answer, both Colin and Luna looked surprised. There were so many children, not to mention wizarding families, even Muggle families were rare. Listening to the three people's chat, George moved his eyes away from Ginny's suitcase and sighed in his heart. If all wizarding families could be as fertile as the Weasley family, wizards would probably rule the world long ago, and Muggles would have nothing to worry about. While the 4 of them were chatting, the train also started to move out of King's Cross Station, speeding along the fields full of cattle and sheep, heading towards Scotland quickly. It was the first time for them to travel away from home, and they went to the famous Hogwarts. Even the quietest Luna was actually a little excited. So the three of them never stopped chatting. Because much of what the three chatted about later had nothing to do with magic, but their respective childhood experiences and family situations, George gradually withdrew from the chat and began to read a book. Around 12:30, a smiling and dimpled Miko opened the box door and asked, "Dear children, would you like to buy some food for the car? There are BB's multi-flavored beans, bubble super bubble gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pie, crucible-shaped cakes, and licorice wands." Facing the small cart of magic snacks and the witch's question, the three of them shook their heads at the same time. Colin was born into a Muggle family and naturally didn't have much money. All his remaining money was spent on magic cameras. Although Ginny was born into a pure-blood family, her father had long been expelled from the family for being close to Muggles and loving Muggle items. All the family's expenses came from her father's salary from the Ministry of Magic. With so many children going to school, and the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbooks for several of her brothers this year being particularly expensive, even many of her school supplies were second-hand, so how could she get any pocket money to buy snacks? As for Luna, she is not short of pocket money, but she doesn't seem to like snacks much. "One of each, thank you." George knew the situation of several young wizards, so he got up and spent 12 silver sickles and 5 bronze newts, ordered a portion of all the snacks, and placed them on the table. "Ginny, I heard you just said that you know a poisonous spell called the Bat Charm. I wonder if you can teach it to me when you have time." He pushed a quarter of the snacks in front of Ginny, and Ginny nodded with bright eyes. "Of course, no problem. That's my best spell. Even George and Fred have fallen victim to it." "Luna, I would like to ask you some knowledge about magical animals." George pushed another quarter of the snack in front of Luna. Luna smiled and nodded, but did not refuse. Finally, George put aside his share and pushed the remaining quarter towards Colin. "Do you have time to take a magic photo for me? I want to keep it as a souvenir." Chapter 27. "To be honest, you look like my dad. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train and we will take you to school." Night had fallen outside the window, and there were mountains and woods under the deep purple sky. The speed of the train gradually slowed down, and a loud reminder suddenly appeared in the passage of the carriage. "It's time for us to change into our school uniforms." George took off his coat and put on his black Hogwarts wizard robes. Luna, Ginny, and Colin also reacted and quickly changed into their school uniforms. After the train stopped, the little wizards swarmed out, pushing and shoving in the aisles, fearing that they would miss something if they took a step too slow. Some of the little wizards' faces were so squeezed that they were distorted. "Don't worry." Seeing this situation, George decisively stopped Ginny and the 3 others who were trying to squeeze in from behind. "We have already arrived at the station, and there is no way to escape from a castle as big as Hogwarts, so there is no need to panic and squeeze out." Unlike other little wizards, he was very curious and looking forward to Hogwarts, but he was not nervous or confused. On the one hand, he is not a real child after all, and on the other hand, he has experienced time travel, rebirth, soul-splitting, and escape fighting. His heart is much calmer than that of a normal adult. About 2 minutes later, the number of little wizards in the aisle began to decrease, and George took the 3 little ones out of the box and walked slowly out of the car door. "Follow me and don't go over to the upperclassmen." "George, to be honest, you sometimes feel like my dad to me, very reliable." Ginny couldn't help but said as she followed George. "Yeah, he's more reliable than my dad." Thinking of her father Arthur's sometimes unreliable behavior, she added another sentence. Colin and Luna nodded in agreement. Although they had only known each other for less than a day, George had left a very reliable image on them. He speaks calmly and rarely shows surprise for anything. He helps them carry their luggage up and down, wipes their faces when they get dirty from eating snacks, and gets up to cover them with wizard robes when they are sleepy in the afternoon. Even when I got off the car, I felt like an adult was around and that as long as I obeyed, I would be safe. George also smiled when he heard this. In fact, his behaviors were just behaviors that adults would do subconsciously when they see children, especially children who are not annoying. His body in this world is that of a child, but if you want him to keep pretending to be a child, that is really not easy. So he didn't think it was necessary. Given his background in this world, it was normal for him to mature earlier. This was not a bad thing. Freshman! Freshman, come over here! Just then, a familiar voice sounded. George turned his head and looked, and it was Hagrid, the gamekeeper, standing on the side of the station holding a magic lantern, shouting loudly. Even though there were hundreds of students at the station at this time, Hagrid's height of 3 to 4 meters still stood out and it was difficult to miss. Follow me! After turning around and giving instructions, George inserted himself into the dense crowd like a sharp knife, easily pushing aside the senior wizards in front of him, and quickly arrived at Hagrid's side. In terms of strength, even a 7th grade wizard is far behind him. We meet again, little boss. Seeing George, Hagrid immediately bent down and said hello. He still had fresh memories of the little wizard boss who lived in Nocturne Alley and sold him potions at a discount. Hello, Hagrid. George also smiled and nodded. You know Hagrid, why does he call you little boss? Ginny lay next to George's ear and asked curiously. She had never met Hagrid, but she often heard her brother Ron mention it, so she guessed his identity. My adoptive father ran a potion shop. He passed away unexpectedly some time ago. Hagrid came to buy potions. George replied casually. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked, I hope you won't feel sad. Hearing what George said, Ginny's expression immediately turned guilty, while Luna and Colin also had sympathetic looks on their faces. It doesn't matter. George smiled. He wanted to say that he killed the old guy with his own hands, but he knew that saying so would definitely frighten the 3 little guys. After staying next to Hagrid for a while, the first-year wizards soon arrived, about 30 people in total. In fact, there are not many students in Hogwarts. Normally, there are about 300 students. There are about 40 students in a grade. When there are many students, there are more than 40 students, and when there are few students, there are more than 30 students. It's normal when you think about it. After all, there are not many teachers in the college. Just like the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which is taught by all 7 grades, but there is actually only one teacher teaching it. If there are too many people, it is impossible to teach it. After everyone arrived, Hagrid led everyone through a narrow path to the Black Lake. Then as usual, he asked everyone to take a boat to the castle in groups of 4. This is a traditional ceremony necessary for the first grade admission every year. The purpose seems to be to commemorate the 4 legendary wizards who founded Hogwarts. Most of the people who were familiar with each other on the train sat together. Naturally, George took Luna, Ginny, and Colin to sit on a boat. However, these ships are not ordinary ships, but ships with special magic spells attached through alchemy. They do not need oars to row, and can automatically generate wind to drive the ship forward. To be honest, the process of entering Hogwarts Castle from the Black Lake by boat was a bit shocking. Even George couldn't help but sigh a little when he looked up and saw the towering castle. One of the young wizards was so shocked that he accidentally fell into the lake halfway. But there was no accident, because as soon as the young wizard fell into the water, a giant octopus rescued him from the lake and put him back on the boat. Don't underestimate this Black Lake, there are many magical creatures living in it. Crossing the Black Lake, going ashore from the underground dock of the castle, and following the tunnel between the rocks to the castle gate, Hagrid handed them over to a tall black-haired witch in an emerald green robe. This witch was none other than the Professor of Transfiguration, the headmaster of Gryffindor, Minerva McGonagall. Welcome to Hogwarts, the opening banquet is about to begin, but before you take your seat in the auditorium, you must first determine which college you will enter. Professor McGonagall took them to a small house on the left side of the hall on the first floor of the castle and briefly introduced the 4 colleges and the very important College Cup to them. After Professor McGonagall left, the young wizards began to buzz and talk, and the topic was naturally about the sorting ceremony. George was no exception to this, because at this moment he was also thinking about which college he would be sorted into. He was not Harry Potter, the sorting hat would not waste time for him, nor would it send him to any college he wanted to go to. He would be directly assigned according to the results of the magic test like other little wizards. But it didn't matter. In his opinion, all colleges were the same and had their own advantages, because no matter which college he went to, he would become the best and most dazzling one. From today on, Hogwarts will welcome the most powerful and gifted wizard genius in history, and that is George. Chapter 28. The King of Rolls is about to be born. Is George's body considered a genius in this world? Naturally, it doesn't count. Whether it's memory or understanding, they are actually very average. On the contrary, his body in Marvel's original body, because he inherited Professor X's genes, is really a genius in terms of memory and understanding. If it was just like this, he would naturally not have the confidence to become the most powerful and talented student in the entire history of Hogwarts. His confidence mainly comes from 2 points. The first point is that he does not only have one brain, he only has one will. But now that he is able to skillfully operate 2 bodies, it is actually equivalent to being able to operate 2 brains at the same time for memory, analysis, and understanding. For example, when his clone in the Harry Potter world saw a calculation problem, if he just used the clone to calculate it, it might take him 20 seconds to figure it out mentally. If the main world body is awakened at the same time and joins the calculation, and the 2 brains work together, it may not take 10 seconds to calculate the result mentally. In the same way, when he was researching and learning a magic, 2 brains learning together was much better than 1 brain. At that time, he was already comparable to some top geniuses. For this reason, he also specially changed the work and rest time of the main world. In the future, the clone will go to class during the day, and the main body will also act as a second brain in the Marvel world at night to assist in improving learning efficiency, and then catch up on sleep during the day. Secondly, he did something else in the days before school started. That is to use the supercomputer in the basement of the Mutant Academy to record all the books and textbooks he has read in the Harry Potter world into the computer. He also doesn't plan to let go of all the knowledge points from later classes and the books in the school library. The 2 brains were loaded and working together, turning him into a top genius, but he couldn't forget anything. Not to mention him, even the top wizards and legendary wizards in the wizarding world cannot remember every word in every book they have read. But it's different now. All the content is input into the supercomputer. As long as he searches for keywords, the relevant information can jump out immediately. So in the next course, when faced with all the teacher's questions, if he can't remember clearly, he can use the supercomputer to search and get the answers quickly, thereby getting all the points. In the exam, as long as it involves theoretical knowledge, it is no different from an open book exam. In the next 7 years, he will trick all the little wizards to death, including the famous academic master Hermione, and it is impossible to beat him. As for why? Of course, it is to get more resources and better magic. Only those who are good enough can have more privileges. If Hermione hadn't been good enough, how could she have gotten the Time Turner? If Voldemort hadn't been good enough, how could he have been admired by so many wizards, favored by teachers, and learned so many powerful black magics? So he also has to be excellent, excellent in all aspects, preferably so good that even Dumbledore doubts that he is the savior who can save the world. Although that possibility is relatively small. You tell me, how can they accurately assign us to which college? It couldn't be that I passed some kind of test. I didn't read anything except a lot of history of magic. Colin's expression was vaguely uneasy. A young wizard born into a Muggle family basically has no foundation in magic. If he were tested in this area, he would really know nothing. Ron told me it was a scary test, but I didn't believe how the school could do something dangerous to students. If it was, I don't think Ron would have passed the test. Ginny looked like she didn't care about any test. She thought she was much better than Ron's timid brother. Luna still looked so erratic. Although Dad didn't tell me the specific method of sorting into colleges, he said that the whole process is very simple, and we will be sorted into the college that suits us best, so don't worry. That's it, that's good. Which college are you going to? Colin was relieved when he heard this, and then became a little excited. I want to go to Gryffindor. Harry Potter is in Gryffindor, and it is said that the greatest wizard Dumbledore is also from Gryffindor. I also want to go to Gryffindor. My brothers are all Gryffindors. Ginny replied with a slight blush. In fact, the more important reason is that her favorite Harry Potter is in Gryffindor. It will be all right. Luna and George said at the same time. Ah! At this moment, a scream suddenly came from the hut. It turned out that a group of ghosts appeared through the wall, scaring the little wizards. The ghosts laughed and commented on the little wizards. After seeing Professor McGonagall appear, they dispersed and disappeared. Now, get in single file and follow me. Professor McGonagall said with a serious expression, then carried the little wizards out of the hut and walked towards the auditorium on the other side of the hall. It's really magnificent. As the team entered the auditorium, George's eyes also lit up. The first thing that caught his eye was the thousands of magic candles floating in mid-air, and then the beautiful virtual starry sky scene on the ceiling presented by magic. There are 4 long seats below, each one represents a college, and each one is filled with 6 grades of wizards. There were golden plates and goblets on the table. There was another long table on the table opposite, where all the teachers of the school sat. The oldest and most eye-catching person in the middle should be Dumbledore, and Flitwick, Sprout, Lockhart and others sat on both sides. However, he did not see Professor Snape, the Dean of Slytherin. After careful recollection, he remembered that the professor should be patrolling the castle at this time to arrest Harry and Ron, who had been in the news. Because Dobby, the house elf of the Malfoy family, was worried that Harry would encounter the danger brought by Voldemort's diary when he came to Hogwarts this year, he closed the entrance when Harry and Ron entered the 9 3/4 station. The two missed the Hogwarts Express and had to drive Arthur's privately modified magic car to Hogwarts. However, due to Ron's unskilled driving skills, he forgot to be invisible when he took off at the beginning, and many Muggles witnessed the magical scene of the car flying in the air, which was also reported in the Daily Prophet. At this moment, it is estimated that the two have arrived at the school, but they just didn't catch up with the sorting ceremony. He turned his head and looked at the windows around the Great Hall. Sure enough, at a window, he saw 2 boys looking inside, but they were quickly pulled out by a pair of big hands. "Poor 2 little guys, 2 seconds of silence for you." Harry and Ron were caught on the spot by Snape, and it was estimated that the next step would be bad. Because Lily was Harry's mother, Snape would protect Harry even if he sacrificed his own life. But because James was Harry's father, Snape also hated Harry from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 29. Sorting Ceremony. There was a 4-legged stool in front of the long table on the stage, and on the stool was a patched, historical, pointed wizard hat. The pointed wizard hat was singing a song by itself until Professor McGonagall came forward. "Whoever's name I call now, put on the hat, sit on the stool, and wait for the sorting." Professor McGonagall took out a parchment roll. "Colin Creevey." Colin was startled, and immediately trotted up, sat down nervously and put on the hat. Almost without a pause, the hat gave the answer. "Gryffindor." All the wizards at the long table of Gryffindor applauded, celebrating that their college had a new student. Astoria Greengrass. Slytherin. Luna Lovegood. Ravenclaw. Ginny Weasley. Gryffindor. As the little wizards were called up one by one, it was soon George's turn. George. The moment George put on the sorting hat, like other little wizards, he didn't hear any hesitation or questioning from the sorting hat, and got the answer directly. Slytherin. "It's Slytherin." George showed a little surprise on his face, but he quickly restrained his emotions, put down the sorting hat, and walked slowly to the Slytherin table and sat down. To be honest, he thought he was most likely Gryffindor, and a little Ravenclaw, but he didn't expect it to be Slytherin. But after thinking about it, he likes to have plans and clear goals when doing things, and sometimes he is more realistic, which is in line with some characteristics of Slytherin. Maybe he really prefers Slytherin's personality characteristics in his bones. Slytherin does not mean bad, and none of the 4 major colleges refers to absolutely good or absolutely bad. Gryffindor has also produced some wizards like Pettigrew, and Slytherin has also produced wizards like Regulus who are willing to sacrifice themselves to resist Voldemort, and even prefer to die rather than let the house elves replace them. The characteristics of the 4 major colleges are actually mostly positive. Gryffindor is brave, Ravenclaw is knowledgeable, Hufflepuff is upright, and Slytherin is smart, motivated and goal-oriented. Slytherin is also okay. Snape is more protective and proficient in dark magic. If he can win honor for Slytherin, he should have a lot of gains. When he came to his senses, the sorting ceremony was over. In fact, before that, for each college he might be assigned to, he analyzed the personality of each dean and made relevant response plans. Therefore, even if it was Slytherin, it would not be a big problem. Dumbledore said a few simple words, introduced the new defense against the dark arts Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, and announced the start of the dinner. Then, countless delicacies made by house elves appeared on the 4 long tables in an instant, and the hungry little wizards immediately began to show off. George also ate the food on the table, but he still paid some attention to the long table in front of the stage. Sure enough, not long after, a wizard with a thin figure, grayish-yellow skin, a hooked nose, greasy black hair draped over his shoulders, wearing a black robe and cloak, and exuding a cold aura appeared at the door of the auditorium. He walked quickly to the long table like a big bat, and all the little wizards he passed by, no matter which college or grade, couldn't help holding their breath. This person was none other than the Dean of Slytherin, Severus Snape. The top potion master, and a magic master second only to Dumbledore, Voldemort, and Grindelwald. Snape said a few words to Dumbledore and McGonagall, and Professor McGonagall's face quickly turned ugly, and then the three of them walked out of the hall together. My father got promoted again in the Ministry of Magic. When I was 7, my mother bought me a sword worth 20 galleons. Humph, what's yours, me? At the Slytherin table, the first-year wizards began to show off their families and financial resources while eating. The little wizards who can be assigned to Slytherin are basically descendants of pure-blood families. Very few are mixed blood, and it is basically unlikely that there are little wizards born in pure Muggle families. So some of them knew each other when they were young. Even if they didn't know each other, they would deliberately show their families and financial resources at this time to ensure their next position. George didn't get involved. It is very likely that his body is a mixed blood. His Muggle mother had a relationship with his wizard father, and then got pregnant unexpectedly. When he couldn't find the father, he didn't want to drag himself down, and it was normal to abandon the child after giving birth. So in terms of family status, he must be at the bottom of Slytherin, so there is no need to ask for trouble. As a half-blood, as long as he shows absolute strength like Snape and Voldemort, he will naturally not lack status and admirers. Slytherin pays attention to bloodline and strength. Of course you have to be at least a half-blood. Oh, Merlin's beard, it's the Bloody Baron, he looks so scary. At this moment, the little wizards shuddered, because a scary ghost with a thin face, empty eyes, and covered in blood suddenly came to the Slytherin table and sat down. And the place where he sat was right next to George. George looked up at the Bloody Baron, a faint smile appeared on his face, he nodded to the Bloody Baron gracefully, as a greeting, and then continued to eat dinner leisurely. What's the big deal about being covered in blood? He has seen everything in the laboratory and killed dozens of people. How could he be afraid of this little blood? And the Bloody Baron was obviously a little surprised that someone could be so calm when seeing a first-year wizard for the first time. However, as a Slytherin ghost, he was quite satisfied that Slytherin had such a courageous little wizard, so he also nodded in response. Which family is he from? How dare he say hello to the Bloody Baron? I don't know. I haven't heard of him. He should be a half-blood. Half-blood? But he doesn't look like one. I think he looks like a wizard from one of the 28 families. He looks very elegant. George's performance in front of the Bloody Baron naturally caught the attention of all the Slytherin wizards. They were also curious about this elegant and bold little wizard. However, they soon concluded that George was a half-blood, because if he was pure blood, they would not have heard of him. His name, George, was also very strange. But even so, some little wizards, especially the little witches in the first and second grades, developed a little affection for George. This also made some little wizards look at George with a little more jealousy. Chapter 30. A Show of Strength. Draco, he performed much better than you did last year. A short-haired little witch in the second grade seat at the Slytherin long table teased the blonde boy sitting opposite. The boy's expression immediately became unhappy. What is he? He is just a half-blood. Let me tell you, I will be the team's seeker this year and help Slytherin win the House Cup. Last year, the Bloody Baron sat next to him. He scared him half to death that year and became a big stain in his life. Draco, are you really going to join the team? Hearing the news that Draco was going to join the team, the attention of the little wizards was immediately attracted. You know, there are almost few wizards who don't like the sport of Quidditch, and the annual Quidditch game is also the most concerned thing for everyone. Of course, my skills are much better than that stupid Potter, he is just lucky. Malfoy said proudly. In fact, his father sold a lot of things in Nocturne Alley, and used the money to replace the entire Slytherin Quidditch team with the latest Nimbus 2001, so this opportunity came. When the banquet was about to end, Dumbledore, Snape and McGonagall rushed back. Dumbledore talked about some precautions and ended the opening dinner with a collective singing of the school song. First-year students, follow me. At this time, the fifth-year prefects on the 4 long tables stood up almost at the same time. The first-year students of the 4 colleges also stood up and followed the prefects of their respective colleges to their dormitories. Leaving the hall and coming to the lobby on the first floor, the 4 colleges began to separate. The little wizards of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw climbed the marble stairs to the upper floor of the castle, while the little wizards of Slytherin and Hufflepuff went to the basement of the castle. The Slytherin dormitory is even lower than the Hufflepuff dormitory. Let me tell you, of the 4 dormitories in the school, our Slytherin dormitory is the best, because you can directly see the underwater world of the Black Lake and the magical creatures living in the Black Lake from the dormitory and the lounge. The 5th-year prefect walking in front saw that the Slytherin wizards had a strange expression because of the cold and dark basement, so he immediately raised his head and proudly introduced them. When the wizards heard that they could see the magical creatures under the Black Lake in the dormitory, they immediately showed surprise. Because they were impressed by the big octopus that saved people when they took a boat across the Black Lake. Pure blood. Walking to a wall at the end of the basement, the prefect shouted a command loudly, and the wall immediately cracked, revealing a large room covered in green, which was the Slytherin common room. The password of the common room is changed every 2 weeks, and the new password will be notified on the bulletin board. The prefect introduced when he took the wizards into the lounge. At this time, the attention of the wizards was completely attracted by the scene in the lounge. Gorgeous decorations, exquisitely carved furniture, and the beautiful Black Lake view outside the transparent glass instantly diluted the darkness of the dungeon. The most magical thing is the medieval tapestry hanging on the wall, which depicts various famous adventures of the Slytherins at that time. It's like watching a big movie, and the protagonists in it will greet you from time to time. Look, it's a mermaid just swam over. Okay, you will see these often in the future, don't be too surprised. Now I suggest you go to your respective dormitories to tidy up. Boys are on the left and girls are on the right. Your names are posted on the door of the dormitory. Check in according to your names. The class leader waved his hand with satisfaction, and finally left after a few instructions. It's like living in an aquarium. George looked around the common room, and instead of continuing to visit the common room with other little wizards, he turned and walked towards the boys' dormitory. Soon he found his name at the door of a room, and there were 3 other names next to his name, which meant that he had 3 roommates. Baron Ballantyne, Ivy Thorn, Cesar Burke, it seems that they are not famous families. After a quick glance, he didn't care and pushed the door and walked into the dormitory. Like the common room, there are many transparent glass in the dormitory, so you can see the scenery of the lake bottom outside. It seems that you are not hungry either. On the bedside table closest to the door, George saw Paige feasting in the cage. It was obvious that the house elf responsible for transporting the luggage did not treat the pets of the little wizards badly and also prepared a sumptuous dinner. Cuckoo! Paige happily responded when he found George appeared, and continued to work hard. After packing his luggage, George sat on the soft bed and began to read the magic book. In fact, he read so hard to learn magic, not only to improve his strength and protect himself, but also because he really likes magic in his heart. Thinking about the things that only existed in illusions in his previous life, they actually appeared in front of him, and he could master this magical power, how could he not indulge in it? To be honest, in all the years of his previous life, there was nothing that made him so obsessed. If the body did not need enough sleep to learn magic better, he could even give up sleep and study and learn the magical power of magic 24 hours a day. Sometimes he also had the idea that this kind of life might be the life he wanted. Instead of going to get off work like a robot every day, wearing a mask to entertain leaders, colleagues, and customers every day, and then slowly aging, turning into a handful of ashes and being buried in the cemetery by future generations. When he thought back to his life, there was nothing worth lingering on. That lowly mermaid dared to scare me through the glass. When I learn powerful black magic in the future, I must let her taste my power. Of course, we are the most noble wizards, and we are pure blood. We will definitely become big names in the wizarding world in the future. About half an hour later, the 3 little wizards chattered and walked into the dormitory. When they saw George and the huge Paige next to him, they were also shocked. Even they rarely saw owls as big as Paige, and their pet owls were only a little bigger than the palm. Hey, kid, are you George Joe? Call me George, or Joe. George replied without raising his head. The 3 looked at each other, and one of the strongest-looking little wizards raised his neck and said, I like your bed, now take your luggage to the innermost bed. The fathers of the three of them all worked in the Ministry of Magic, and they knew each other since childhood. After discovering that the last person in the dormitory was a half-blood who had attracted some attention at the dinner party, they decided to come in and teach him a lesson. So they didn't really like George's bed, but just wanted to give George a warning, so that he would know that they were the protagonists in this dormitory or in the first-year Slytherin College. Chapter 31, A Little Skill in Boxing and Kicks. George closed the magic book in his hand and looked at the three people with some amusement. "I'm so sorry, I like this bed very much and don't want to give it up. You don't seem to understand the current situation." The three little wizards took a step forward at the same time, with a threatening look on their faces. "You should know that although the school prohibits us from using magic attacks, it does not say that we can't use fists." In their opinion, George is much thinner than them in terms of height and body shape, and there are three of them, and George is only one. If George doesn't understand the situation, they don't mind giving him a lesson. "As far as I know, the tradition of Slytherin is that whoever is better is the boss. If you are better than me and have better grades in the future studies, then I am willing to give up my bed. What do you think?" George suggested with a smile. If possible, he still doesn't want to beat up the children. After all, he is now a serious magician. And the most important thing for a magician is elegance. Rolling up your sleeves and beating people is what warriors do. What is he talking about? He means that he, a half-blood, will have better grades than the three of us pure-bloods in the future. This is simply the funniest joke I have ever heard. The leading little wizard burst into laughter upon hearing this, and the two little wizards beside him followed suit. "I now order you to take your luggage and that stupid pet and roll to the innermost bed immediately, otherwise you will regret it." "Forget it, since you don't want to compete in grades, I also know a little bit of boxing." Seeing that the three new roommates were so ignorant, George put the magic book on the bedside, then stood up and moved his hands and feet. No magic, no ability, just relying on pure physical strength, at his current level, let alone the three in front of him, even if the entire first-year wizards came together, he could beat them all to tears. It's not that he has such a high level of fighting skills, it's just that his strength and speed are much higher than these little wizards. "It seems that you really need some lessons." The three little wizards saw George stand up, and said nothing more. They rolled up their wizard robes and rushed over. 2 minutes later, George sat down again gracefully, picked up the magic book and said while reading, "I advise you not to think about going to the teacher and the class leader to complain, otherwise the three of you beat me up and ended up being beaten like this. If it gets out, your next 7 years will be. We know, you. Don't be complacent, you are just a little stronger, if you have the ability, we will compete in grades and magic in the future." The three little wizards lying on the ground with bruises and tears on their faces suddenly changed their faces when they heard the words, and then stammered back. Just now they really had the idea of going to the teacher to complain and then let the teacher punish George severely, but now they think that if that really happens, they may really become the joke of the whole school. So they can only use the excuse of comparing grades to save face a little bit. "Just now I said we were going to compete in grades, but you insisted on competing in fists and feet, ah." George shook his head, and the three little wizards looked even uglier, and they were obviously very regretful. The next day, early in the morning, while the three little wizards with bruised faces were still sleeping soundly, George, who had slept for 7 hours, opened his eyes on time. After a simple wash, he came to the common room. Because the class leader said yesterday when he left, the class schedule for this week would be posted in the common room after 6 in the morning. It is now 7:20, and the normal class time for little wizards is 9 o'clock, so most people have not gotten up yet. There are only a few senior wizards who study very hard in the common room reviewing their lessons, probably 5th-year wizards, because they will take the most important Wizard O.W.L Ordinary Wizard level exam this year. Only one class today. After finding the posted class schedule, George discovered that today is the first day of school, and Slytherin first graders have a history of magic at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the rest of the time is free activities. But after reading it, it is not so easy every day. On Tuesday, there are 2 transfiguration classes in the morning and 1 defense against the dark arts class in the afternoon. On Wednesday, there are 2 herbology classes in the morning and a rest in the afternoon. On Thursday, there is a transfiguration class and defense against the dark arts class in the morning, a charms class in the afternoon, and a history of magic class in the evening. On Friday, there are 2 potions classes in the morning, 1 herbology class in the afternoon, and an astronomy class in the evening. In addition, it is marked that the flying class will start from the 2nd week and will be held after the charms class on Thursday afternoon. In addition, the name of the college that will take the class together is marked on the schedule for each class. Because the teaching staff is limited and the number of students in one college is too small. So in Hogwarts, basically 2 colleges take a class at the same time, with more than 20 people in one classroom. For example, potions and flying classes are taken with the first-year students of Gryffindor. Charms and transfiguration classes are taken with Hufflepuff. Herbology, history of magic, defense against the dark arts and astronomy are all taken with Ravenclaw. At the same time, the classroom locations of each subject are also marked above. There are too few spells. After memorizing the entire curriculum, George couldn't help but frown. For him, the most important of all the courses is the spells class, because most of the magic principles and basic spells are taught in this class. But there is only 1 class per week on the schedule, just like the useless astronomy class. But after thinking about it, it makes sense. This is the 1st grade, and there are many children from Muggle families who know nothing about magic. They don't need to master so many spells in a hurry. It is more important to lay a good foundation. It seems that I still have to rely on myself. This intensity of course is too little for him. If he wants to master more magic, he still needs to spend more time on self-study. Fortunately, unlike Nocturne Alley, even if you study by yourself in Hogwarts, the efficiency is much higher. Because if you don't understand something, you can ask the teacher at any time, or go to the library to check the massive amount of free magic books. Since there is only class in the afternoon, I will take a good walk in the morning. George did not continue reading, but wandered around the entire Hogwarts castle. He will study here for the next 7 years. He must first check out every place, so that it will be convenient for him to do anything later. It is also a good opportunity to recognize the classrooms in advance. After leaving the Slytherin common room, he first walked through the entire dungeon. Don't underestimate the dungeon. The dungeon under Hogwarts Castle is very large and winding. It took him nearly an hour to walk around. The boathouse, the dungeon storage room, the room where ghosts often gather for the Death Day party, the potion classroom, the Slytherin Dean's office, the 5th underground classroom, the Hogwarts kitchen and the Hufflepuff dormitory. The kitchen door was closed, and only the sound of the house elves making breakfast with magic could be heard. There were a lot of wooden barrels at the door of the Hufflepuff dormitory, which required specific knocks to enter, so he didn't go in to visit, but went up to the 1st floor hall to have breakfast. Chapter 32. Everyone here is trash. George, long time no see. As soon as he reached the 1st floor, George heard a shout from above. He turned around and saw that it was Harry, Hermione, and Ron coming down the marble stairs. Good morning, Harry, Hermione, and this one. Hello, my name is Ron. I heard Harry said that you helped him escape from Nocturne Alley last time. That's so cool. Ron's tone was a little excited. That was the famous Nocturne Alley, a place where his 2 twin brothers dreamed of exploring. You and Harry are not as cool as you, flying from London to school in a magic car, appearing in the Daily Prophet, and crashing the school's Whomping Willow. Hermione on the side sneered a little bit sarcastically. Ron's face suddenly stiffened when he heard this. Okay, can you stop giving us lessons? We don't want that either. He discovered that Hermione was really a smaller version of Professor McGonagall sometimes. She always said she liked to tell them some great truths, but in fact sometimes she was braver than them. Harry took a step forward, avoiding the quarrel between Ron and Hermione, and asked George. We didn't see the sorting ceremony yesterday. Which academy did you sort to? Slytherin. George took out the Slytherin symbol from his pocket that was distributed yesterday and had not yet been pinned to his chest. Harry immediately showed a look of regret when he saw this. It would be nice if you could be in Gryffindor. In his heart, he was still somewhat prejudiced against Slytherin, especially since Slytherin had those annoying guys like Malfoy, and the dean was Snape, whom he hated the most. George smiled. It doesn't matter which college you choose. As long as you go to Hogwarts, I'll be satisfied. Good morning, George. At this time, another call came from above. This time it was Ginny, Colin, and Luna coming down the marble stairs. Do you know each other? Harry and Ron were stunned when they saw Ginny greeting George. Yesterday we sat in a box on the train, and George took good care of us. When Ginny saw Harry's presence, her voice immediately became much softer and her movements became more ladylike. Thank you for looking after Ginny. Ron, who had changed his attitude when he heard that George was assigned to Slytherin, regained his opinion of George and even expressed his gratitude. Compared to Harry, he actually had a deeper prejudice against Slytherin. Before coming to Hogwarts, he once believed that all bad wizards came from Slytherin. Well, could you please take a photo of me and Mr. Harry Potter? Colin handed the camera to Ron and looked at Harry with bright eyes. My name is Colin. I want to take a photo with you and send it to my dad to prove that I saw you. He is a milkman and there is no one in our family except me. Ron took the camera helplessly. When he first met Harry, he didn't behave much better than this one, which is understandable. After taking pictures, several people walked and chatted until they arrived at the auditorium. At this time, many little wizards were already having breakfast in the Great Hall, and the 4 long tables were piled with various foods prepared by the house elves, such as pumpkin porridge, pickled herring, bread, eggs, fresh meat, etc. Different houses rarely sit together for breakfast, so George went to the Slytherin table, Luna went to the Ravenclaw table, and Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Colin went to the Glenfindow long table. First year, you seem to know Harry Potter and the others. As soon as George sat down, the blonde Malfoy took his 2 followers, Goyle and Crabbe, and sat opposite him. Because of Pansy's teasing yesterday, he had an impression of George. He just saw George chatting happily with Harry, whom he hated the most, and he suddenly felt unhappy. Called friends. George took a bowl of pumpkin porridge and a pile of fresh meat and replied casually. Being close to Harry would inevitably offend Malfoy, which he had known for a long time. In fact, even if he wasn't close to Harry, he would still offend Malfoy. Because he wants to become the best student in the entire Hogwarts and even join the Quidditch team, which will definitely steal Malfoy's limelight. But it doesn't matter. Little Malfoy is not his father, Big Malfoy, so he poses no threat to him. Friends? Slytherin and Gryffindor are enemies and can never become friends. You'd better stay away from them, otherwise I will teach you how to become a Slytherin wizard. Malfoy was obviously dissatisfied with George's attitude, and his tone was full of warning. George replied calmly. I am free to make friends with whom I choose, you should take care of yourself. I heard that the first place in last year's final exam was Miss Hermione from Gryffindor. We, Slytherin, also lost to Gryffindor in the House Cup that we had maintained for 6 years. You guys are really useless. When he said the last sentence, he deliberately raised his voice so much that even the little wizards at other tables looked over. What are you talking about? You actually called me trash. What qualifications do you, a half-blood, have to call me trash? When Malfoy heard George's words, he went crazy and slapped the table hard, causing the mountain of bread on the table to collapse. George put down the spoon in his hand and looked up at Malfoy. As far as I know, our Slytherin dean is also of mixed race. Are you discriminating against our dean? The dean of the hospital is naturally different from you. I'm just talking about you. Malfoy's tone immediately weakened. It is normal for pure-bloods to discriminate against half-bloods, but this kind of thing cannot be said openly, because there are many half-bloods in the senior grades of Slytherin, and the dean is also a half-blood. He was also confused just now. You are a small first-year student, but you are so arrogant. We Slytherins compete on strength, not eloquence. At this time, Pansy, who was sitting on the second-year side, came over. Although she teased Malfoy yesterday, it did not mean that she did not stand on Malfoy's side. The Malfoy family is a well-known family among pure-bloods. In the future, she may marry Malfoy and make her family more prosperous. So when she saw Malfoy being humiliated, she naturally came up to help. This lady is right. The excellence of our Slytherins is based on strength, so I am not targeting him. I am saying that everyone here, your entire second year, is trash. George wiped his mouth gracefully and stood up, speaking loudly in a tone that stunned countless young wizards. If you weren't trash, how could you let the 6-year-old House Cup end here? I, George, will put it here today. As long as I am here, the first place will always belong to us Slytherin, and I will win the House Cup back from Gryffindor. But I am different from you trash. I will not be hostile to students from other houses because of this healthy competition. Competition is competition, and friends are friends, whether it is Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, or Hufflepuff. I will make friends that I should make. I will use my strength to win honor for Slytherin. This is the demeanor that we Slytherins should have. Chapter 33. Hogwarts Castle. Putting down the tissue, and ignoring Malfoy and the others, George turned around and walked straight out of the Great Hall. Just as he was about to leave the Great Hall, thunderous applause broke out. Not only from the senior wizards of Slytherin, but also from the wizards of the other 3 colleges. Regardless of whether George had the ability or not, just the words he said in the Great Hall and his courage made many young wizards admire him. Because not everyone dared to say these words in public, and once they could not complete them later, it would become a complete joke. Even Malfoy did not dare to make such a boast, or it seems that no one has dared to do so since the opening of Hogwarts. Harry, to be honest, I was just impressed by his handsomeness. Although he is a Slytherin and said he wanted to steal our house cup, I didn't find him annoying. Especially, did you see Malfoy's face? Even when we won the house cup last year, he wasn't that ugly. At the Gryffindor table, Ron couldn't help but say to Harry. In terms of hating Malfoy, he actually hated him more than Harry, especially when his father and Malfoy's father had a fight in Diagon Alley before. And Harry nodded. George is different from Malfoy, but we can't lose the house cup either. Like George said, we are in healthy competition, and we work hard together. At this time, Hermione was no longer angry about Harry and Ron's dangerous behavior yesterday, and returned to her usual appearance. We will work hard. Ginny and Colin on the side looked at Harry expectantly at the same time, as if waiting for his reply. Harry encouraged helplessly. Come on. I think they can set up a Harry Potter fan club soon. Ron couldn't help but joked when he saw this. Compared to the joy on this side, Malfoy's face on the other side was gloomy and almost dripping with water. The louder the applause in the auditorium just now, the more swollen his face was. In fact, the senior Slytherin students have always been unhappy about the loss of the Quidditch game and the College Cup last year, but they didn't say much because of his family and status. Because before them, Slytherin had won for 6 consecutive years, which means that the 6 grades above Slytherin are stronger than the other 3 colleges. As a result, they all lost to Gryffindor last year, and the biggest reason was Hermione and Harry, who were in the same grade as him. As a representative of Slytherin in the same grade, he naturally had to take the blame. If he could surpass Hermione in grades and Harry in Quidditch, and earn more points, even if Harry and his friends got so many more points in the end, they would not lose. We must win the College Cup, but not by him, but by me, Malfoy. Don't worry, he's just a joke, time will prove that you are the hope of Slytherin. Although Pansy looked ugly, she was not worried at all. Because unless George is outstanding, even if his grades are really good, he will not live up to his words just now, and the ending has already been determined. There is no way, you bumped into it yourself. After leaving the Great Hall, George continued to explore the first floor. As a Slytherin, without the blessing of a family background, if you want to be famous and valued as quickly as possible, you must show your strengths and not hide your shortcomings. As for whether this will make Dumbledore think of Voldemort, it is not the case. He has not shown any signs of hating Muggle wizards, and he has generously admitted his friendship with Harry, Ron, Hermione, and others. So Malfoy's picking faults can actually give him the opportunity to express his position and establish his personality, otherwise he really can't say it so openly. In fact, if it weren't for this, he could have ignored Malfoy's troublemaking, because the other party couldn't do anything to him anyway. In addition to the Great Hall and the waiting room for the sorting ceremony where he had been before, there are actually many rooms on the first floor. For example, the staff lounge specially prepared for the teachers of the college, the office of the administrator Filch, the Transfiguration classroom and some other temporary classrooms. After visiting the first floor, he went to the second floor along the marble stairs. The second floor is mainly the History of Magic classroom where he will take classes in the afternoon, the office of the Gryffindor Dean and the school infirmary. The school infirmary is managed by Poppy Pomfret, who is good at healing magic. There is also a bathroom for girls. The most important defense against the dark arts professor's office and Moaning Myrtle's bathroom on the third floor are connected to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. George did not go in, but just looked at it from the outside. The fourth floor is the Charms classroom, defense against the dark arts classroom, trophy display room and armor corridor. There were many armors that had been awakened in the armor corridor. When he passed by, he was lucky enough to see 2 sets of armor fighting. The cause seemed to be that one set of armor sang too badly and the other set of armor could not stand it any longer. He was very interested in this kind of magic that could awaken the intelligence of dead things. If it was used in the mutant school in the future, it could also add a lot of defense to the school. There was another place on the 4th floor that was also very important, or to him, it should be the most important. That was the Hogwarts Library, which was said to have tens of thousands of magic books and countless banned books that could not be bought outside. It was closed before 8 o'clock every night. The 5th floor was full of abandoned classrooms and a bathroom for both men and women. The 6th floor also has some abandoned classrooms and bathrooms for prefects. The 7th floor has some vacant offices and boys' bathrooms. The 8th floor has the office of the Ravenclaw headmaster, the entrance to the Gryffindor Tower, the entrance to the divination classroom in the North Tower, the entrance to the Ravenclaw Tower, the entrance to the West Tower, the entrance to the headmaster's office, and the room of requirement. George knew how to enter the room of requirement, but he didn't go in. In his opinion, the entire Hogwarts castle was probably under Dumbledore's surveillance, and it was hard not to be suspicious if he suddenly entered the room of requirement. The key point was that he didn't need the room of requirement now. He didn't plan to touch the Voldemort Horcrux hidden in the room of requirement for the time being. After visiting the castle, he walked around the castle again, including the greenhouse and garden dedicated to herbology, the flying broom class learning venue, and the Quidditch field. After all the inspections were completed, it was already noon. He did not go to Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest, which were farther away, but returned to the Great Hall to eat. This time when he entered the Great Hall, he was obviously no longer a little transparent. Many young wizards secretly pointed at him, some admired him, some were jealous, some were disdainful, and some were full of malice waiting to see the joke. George didn't care about it. He also met Harry and others who came to eat after class. Hermione showed him the exquisite buttons she made from beetles in the Transfiguration class. Ron was in a bad mood. Harry told him that it was because Ron received a yelling letter from his mother after he left in the morning. In the afternoon, George held the History of Magic textbook and started his first class at Hogwarts. Chapter 34, George the Academic Master appears. History of Magic is taught by Slytherins and Ravenclaws, so soon after George entered the classroom, he saw Luna wearing homemade carrot-shaped earrings. It's just that maybe because of Luna's unusual behavior and way of speaking, no Ravenclaw students in the same grade are willing to sit with her, including her roommates. Similarly, George is sitting alone because of his speech in the morning. No one wants to sit with him before he is sure whether he is good or not, lest he becomes a joke. As for his 3 roommates, the swelling on their faces has not subsided yet, and they are even less likely to sit next to him. Don't worry about other people's opinions, just be ourselves. Seeing George sitting alone, Luna stood up and sat next to him, inserted her wand behind her ear, and comforted him in a very steady voice. And George smiled and nodded. Thanks. Although he didn't need comfort, Luna's actions still deserved this thank you. Speaking of which, although Luna is 1 grade younger than Harry and the others, in terms of psychological maturity, she is sometimes more mature than some adults. She has her own ideas and beliefs, and even if others think she is crazy, she doesn't care. She didn't get angry when facing those classmates who often made jokes and pranks, and always looked calm. To be honest, George felt that at Luna's age, he would never be able to reach her level. The bell rang, and Ghost Binns, the teacher of History of Magic, walked through the blackboard wall and appeared on the podium. This is the only ghost teacher in Hogwarts. He was the History of Magic professor at Hogwarts when he was alive. Because one day he stood up to go to class and accidentally left his body in an armchair in front of the fire in the staff room, thus turning into a ghost and continuing to teach the history of magic at Hogwarts. In the Middle Ages, non-magic people were particularly afraid of magic, but lacked sufficient understanding of magic. Occasionally, they caught a real witch or wizard, and burning them was of no use at all. The wizard only needs to cast the most basic fire-condensing spell, pretending to scream in pain while enjoying the numbing pleasure. Weird Gwendolyn liked the feeling of being burned so much that she deliberately disguised herself in various disguises and had her caught 47 times. There was no prelude or self-introduction. From the moment he stood on the podium, Professor Binns began to talk about the history of magic in his own breathy and drawl tone. As if casting hypnotic magic, some little wizards quickly fell asleep. After continuing to speak for half an hour, Professor Binns stopped for a moment, and then started to ask questions according to the rigid teaching rhythm. Can anyone tell me how many times Weird Wendelin was captured by Muggles? Although he asked the question, he didn't expect anyone to actually answer it. He knew very well what his class was like. So this is just a necessary part of class. If no one answers, he will continue talking until the end of get out of class. 47 times, Professor. However, just when he was about to skip this link and continue, a little wizard raised his hand and gave the answer. Very good, correct answer. Professor Binns was a little surprised, but he didn't think much about it and prepared to continue teaching. There are very few young wizards who can answer during his question session. The last time it was the Gryffindor student named Grant or Granny. But this is nothing in his thousands of years of teaching. Aren't you given any points? It seems like just answering the questions isn't enough. When George saw that Professor Binns did not give him a mark for his correct answer, he raised his eyebrows slightly. According to his understanding, Professor Binns is the only professor among all the professors who will not give points, not because he is mean, but mainly because he has a bad memory and cannot remember to give points. After becoming a ghost, apart from remembering various historical knowledge clearly, my memory in other aspects became very poor. So if you want to get points, just answering the questions correctly is not enough. Professor, I have a question. Since wizards can use various magics to defend themselves against Muggle attacks, why were so many wizards persecuted by Muggles back then? Because the way wizards learned magic was passed down from their parents, many wizards didn't actually master many magic spells. So when the four deans founded Hogwarts, they actually wanted more wizards to learn the magic to protect themselves, right? Yes, that's the reason. It seems you have some knowledge of the history of magic. It was only during this period that I memorized more than 40 magic books such as History of Magic, A History of Hogwarts, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century, Modern History of Magic, and Interpretation of Medieval Events. Are you sure you have memorized so many books on the history of magic? After hearing George's words, Professor Binns showed a rare expression of surprise. The other drowsy little wizards also woke up one after another, with gossipy looks on their faces. Then I want to test you. Next, Professor Binns began to ask questions about the time, location, and general content of various events from the history of magic books that George mentioned. And George answered them all fluently without making any mistakes. Your name is George, right? That's great. The school hasn't had a student as interested in the history of magic as you for a long time. Your knowledge of the history of magic exceeds that of many 5th and 6th grade students. Professor Binns' prim face showed a smile full of relief. The reason why other ghosts turned into ghosts was because of the fear of death, but he was because of his obsession with teaching the history of magic. So nothing could make him happy to see a student so gifted and interested in the history of magic. I have always felt that the history of magic is a very important and worthy subject. Studying the history of magic allows us to use the experiences of the wizards and wizards in history for our own use and enlighten our wisdom. Not only will it help us learn magic and improve spells, but it will also help us find ways to get along with wizards and muggles. The winner can see the future from history and illuminate our wisdom for moving forward. George explained his views on history in a loud voice, and the little wizards in Slytherin and Ravenclaw next to him were all stunned. Although they didn't quite understand what George said, they felt that what he said seemed very powerful. Because at this time, Professor Binns' ghostly body actually started to tremble with excitement. Well said, I want to give you a reward, By the way, I can give you extra points. I forgot about it. George, you are great. I will give Slytherin 50 points. Oh, Professor Binns actually gave points to Merlin's beard. Didn't he say that he never gives points? Oh, Merlin's pants, George actually won 50 points for Slytherin in one go. It seems that what he said this morning was not a big lie. When the little wizards heard Professor Binns giving points, they immediately exploded. Chapter 35, George, the points-scoring maniac. The history of magic is over, and George is no longer alone, but surrounded by little wizards. Did you really memorize so many magic books? Yes, my memory is pretty good. I heard you're going to win the House Cup for Slytherin. That's natural. On the way back, when faced with questions from the little Slytherin wizards of the same grade, George responded with ease, always showing confidence but not arrogance, and quickly got along with them. Even the 3 roommates who had been beaten by him before looked at him with a little more admiration. This is the case with Slytherin. As long as you are a Slytherin, as long as you are good enough and can win honor and benefits for them, then they will instinctively gather around you. As a first-year student, George scored an exaggerated 50 points for Slytherin in the first period of school, which was an honor for the entire first-year class. Of course, if George wants to truly become the leader of Slytherin, this achievement alone is far from enough. But this is at least a good start. The fact that he got 50 points for Slytherin from Mr. Binns in the History of Magic class was quickly known by most teachers and students in the school as the young wizards spread the word. In fact, it wouldn't be that fast normally, mainly because Professor Binns is famous for not giving points, and the enthusiasm of George's speech in the morning has not subsided, so they just collided. The advantage was that when he was sitting in the Slytherin common room reading at night, senior Slytherins would come over to say hello and get to know him from time to time. Even if Malfoy wanted to cause trouble for him, he was stopped by the prefect. The next day, both morning periods were transfiguration classes, with the first years of Hufflepuff. As soon as George entered the classroom, he was noticed by the little wizards of Hufflepuff. Apparently they also heard about George getting 50 points for Slytherin yesterday. However, they did not make any provocation. Most of the little wizards in Hufflepuff had good personalities and were just curious. Meow. Just as the transfiguration class was about to begin, a tabby cat walked in from the door, and then, amidst the exclamations of the young wizards, it transformed into Professor McGonagall in dark green robes. Animagus transformation. George's eyes couldn't help but gleam slightly when he saw McGonagall transforming from a cat into a human. This is a very profound transformation technique that can permanently transform into an animal. Although it cannot be a magical creature and can only be one kind, he still finds it very useful. Because no matter what kind of animal it is, as long as it is not too conspicuous, it is a very good disguise. This kind of disguise is very useful whether it is used to obtain intelligence or to escape and track. Imagine that you are being hunted by a large group of agents, and are being monitored by satellites. There are countless sniper rifles in the distance. There is no way to escape. But once you master the animagus transformation, you can find a house and go into it, transform into an ordinary creature, hide and escape. If it's a cat, it might make people a little suspicious, but if it's flies, mosquitoes, 7-spotted ladybugs, etc., it's really unimpeded. Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. If anyone is mischievous in my class, I will ask him out and never let him in again. I warned you. Professor McGonagall walked onto the podium, first gave a stern warning, then waved her wand and easily turned the podium into a pig, and then back again. When the students saw this, they were all attracted and wanted to start learning this magical magic right away. It was only after Teacher McGonagall gave a theoretical explanation that they realized how difficult it was to turn such a large lecture into a pig. Sure enough, famous teachers are different. After listening to a theoretical class, George was filled with emotions. Transfiguration was taken out as a separate subject from all magic spells, which shows that this subject is much more advanced than other magics. Although he himself has spent time and research, and has even memorized the entire textbook, History of Magic mainly relies on computers for cheating, there are still many things he does not understand. Even though he asked Tonks for advice several times, he still couldn't quite understand what Tonks was explaining. It's like you are learning a high-level math book. Even if you memorize the entire high-level math book, you may not be able to get many points on the test. As a top transfiguration master, Professor McGonagall has many years of teaching experience. Under her explanation, George's understanding of transfiguration suddenly made a breakthrough. 5 points for Slytherin. Before the end of the first class, there was naturally a question and answer session, and George did his part and scored 5 points. There is no way, 2 heads have a strong memory, not to mention that they are still taking notes on the computer, let alone serious knowledge points. Even Professor McGonagall's reprimands are written down verbatim. Moreover, Professor McGonagall is different from Professor Snape. He is very fair and treats students equally. He will not deliberately make things difficult and deny points to George just because he is a Slytherin. On the contrary, seeing that George answered perfectly and had some understanding of the transfiguration technique, there was a rare smile on his lips. The first theoretical section and the second section are naturally practical lessons. Professor McGonagall gave each of them a match and asked them to use a basic transfiguration spell to turn it into a needle. But this is obviously not easy for the little wizards. They chanted the spell over and over again, waved the wand over and over again, but the matchsticks were still matches. Only a few talented little wizards had some changes in their matches, but they were still a long way from turning into needles. Don't give up, practice more, think about the key points I taught you in the last class, the speed and rhythm of the spell, the angle of waving the wand, and the most important thing is your heart. You must firmly believe that you can turn it into a needle. Professor McGonagall walked back and forth in the classroom, constantly correcting some mistakes made by the little wizards in casting spells. But when she walked to George's position, she couldn't help but brighten her eyes. Slytherin, add 5 more points. Because she saw a perfect needle, not only the needle head was very sharp, but even the threading space at the end of the needle was flawless. After hearing Professor McGonagall's extra points, the little wizards turned their eyes to Qiaoji, and saw the perfect needle on his desk, and showed envy and admiration. At this time, George smiled and did not say anything shocking. In fact, after the first class, he has mastered one of the essentials of transfiguration, or should I say the essentials of most spells. That is the power of the mind, the power of belief. When learning a new spell, spells and wands are only auxiliary, otherwise no wizard can cast spells silently and without a wand. The most important thing is the mind, that is, spiritual power, which is the root of the completion of magic. It is said that the magic in the Harry Potter world is very idealistic, and it is not without reason. He just has a great advantage in this regard, because in addition to being a wizard, he also has the mental power of a second-level mutant. So after learning the theoretical knowledge from Professor McGonagall, he successfully turned the match into a needle without a few experiments. The key is that he feels that with his mental power, it may not be just that. Maybe he can't turn the podium into a pig, but something bigger, like transforming something the size of a fist, should be possible now. Chapter 36. Lockhart has 3 good qualities. After the transfiguration class, he did not go directly to eat. Instead, he chased Professor McGonagall and asked questions about transfiguration for a full hour before leaving with unfinished content. You must know that every professor has to teach several grades and is very busy. If he doesn't find the right time to ask more questions, he may not be able to find it. Afternoon, Defense against the Dark Arts class. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing a lavender robe, walked into the classroom coquettishly and stood on the podium. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin 3rd Class, honorary member of the Defense League Against the Dark Arts, 5-time winner of Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award, but I don't talk about that, I'm not use your smile to drive away all the female ghosts. What he thought was a humorous opening statement made the boys in the classroom look at each other a little bit, but the girls liked it very much and clapped their hands excitedly. This guy looks pretty good. Looking at the wizard above who had obtained a series of honors through deception, George had to admit that the reason why he became popular in the wizarding world and was sought after by witches of different ages was not just because of his good writing. What's more important is his handsome appearance and shameless character. But even though this guy doesn't have much real material, he still has a lot of uses for him. Anyway, he concluded that Lockhart had 3 good qualities. First, the credits are good. As long as you meet his appetite, unlike other professors who worry as much, the credits will be given easily. Second, he has good rights. Only professors can issue notes asking students to go to the restricted book area to get books. If they build a good relationship, they can get notes from Lockhart to go to the restricted book area. Third, the forgetting curse is good. This guy's other spells are a mess, but he is as good as a top wizard in the forgetting curse. If he can learn the forgetting curse from Lockhart, it will be of great help to him in the Marvel world. So he didn't intend to mess up this class. I see you all bought my complete set, which is great. Then let's take a little test today. Don't be afraid, just see how well you read and how much you understand. After Lockhart introduced himself, he took out a stack of papers and distributed them to the young wizards in the classroom one by one. I'll give you 30 minutes, now start. George picked up the paper and saw that it was filled with questions about Lockhart himself, and asked Marvel to quickly open the computer and check it out. After Lockhart became the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, he replaced all the defense against the dark arts textbooks from grades 1 to 7 with 7 of his own books. So George naturally bought it, and he also bought the defense against the dark arts textbook that was used by the first grade in previous years, Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Defense. He has actually read all 7 of Lockhart's books. After all, aside from the boastful content, many magical experiences are the real experiences of some powerful wizards. It's just that those experiences were plagiarized by Lockhart, and then he used the forgetting spell that he was good at to make those wizards forget. Half an hour later, Lockhart put the papers away and started reading and commenting directly on the podium. Most of the questions on the paper were not answered correctly, and even the little witches who liked him could only answer half of them correctly until he turned to George's paper. "Oh, who is this?" "George, I know you. Yesterday morning, you said you would bring back the house cup for Slytherin. It's very good. You are really good. Not only does he know my favorite color, but he also knows what I want most for my birthday and my great and noble ambitions. You actually answered all my questions correctly, 20 points, plus 20 points for Slytherin." While marking George's paper, the smile on Lockhart's face never faded. In the defense against the dark arts class he had taken these past 2 days, except for a second-year Gryffindor girl named Hermione, who got most of the answers correct, few of the others got more than half. But now, there is actually a student who answered all the questions correctly. He is also a famous Slytherin freshman in the past 2 days. How can this not make his vanity burst? "Professor, I think your book contains a lot of magical experiences worth studying in depth, so I have read it many times and it has been deeply imprinted in my mind." George raised his hand and said. And this sentence obviously won Lockhart's heart. He came to George with great satisfaction and laughed. "Don't worry, as long as you work hard, with your magic talent that is almost close to mine, you will definitely be as successful as me one day in the future. I am very optimistic about you. Even if I succeed, I have to thank the professor for his guidance. I have always been a grateful person." A meaningful smile appeared on George's face, and Lockhart's eyes suddenly lit up, and the look he looked at George became more and more kind. "Okay, let's start reading my book Walking with Ghouls. This book has a lot of introductions about ghouls. I will ask random questions and give points for correct answers." Just like that, when the defense against the dark arts class ended, George got 10 points for Slytherin again. So far, in just 2 days, he has already scored a full 90 points for Slytherin, allowing Slytherin to be far ahead from the start. Likewise, he didn't let Lockhart go after class. "Professor, I have some questions about magic that I would like to ask you." "No problem. Since we are the same kind of people, I can spare my precious time after class to give you a small lesson." Lockhart did not refuse, but winked at George. From George's actions yesterday morning and his current performance, he keenly realized that he was the same as himself, the kind of person obsessed with fame. But he didn't hate George, because George had already shown that he would benefit from him. The more famous George became, the more famous Lockhart became. More importantly, he relied on deception, and this George was obviously really gifted. Such potential stocks, like Harry, can be won over by his side in advance. "Professor, I am interested in the Oblivion spell. I wonder if you can." Seeing that Lockhart agreed, George didn't hesitate and went straight to the point. Lockhart was a little guilty and was planning to fool George, but when he heard that he was asking for advice on the Oblivion charm, the only spell he was good at, he immediately raised his chest and replied nonchalantly. "It's just the Oblivion charm, which is the spell I'm least good at, but it's still a little better than the guys in the Ministry of Magic's Memory Deletion Command." The Ministry of Magic's Memory Deletion Command is affiliated with the Ministry of Magic's Magical Accidents and Disasters Department. Its main work is to use the Oblivion charm to erase the memories of Muggles who have seen the existence of magic, and to use the Repair charm to repair buildings damaged by magic battles. Therefore, the wizards in this department are among the best Oblivion charm and Repair charm masters in the wizarding world. Chapter 37. Wednesday morning, Herbal Medicine Class. Not surprisingly, George once again scored 10 points for Slytherin. Originally, this body had a lot of knowledge about herbs and potions because he had been selling potions with the old wizard for many years. Coupled with the computer assistance of the body, the first-year problems were not difficult for him at all. In the afternoon, George left the castle alone and walked along a path leading to the Forbidden Forest towards Hagrid's hut. It's early July, the most comfortable time when it's neither too cold nor too hot. The path outside the castle is filled with all kinds of wild flowers, and the green grass stretches all the way to the Black Lake. If you walk a few more steps along the grass toward the Black Lake, you may find a few couples of senior wizards in love on the slopes. Foreign children are already precocious, and Hogwarts wizards are even precocious. Many of them start falling in love in the 2nd and 3rd grade. Those like Ron and Harry, who only start to blossom in 4 or 5 years, are in the minority. Without disturbing the little mandarin ducks, they walked all the way through the Quidditch pitch and across a long stone bridge. Finally, at the edge of an endless forest, he saw a wooden house that was enlarged 2 or 3 times, and large pumpkins planted in front of the wooden house. Wong wong wong. As soon as he reached the door of the cabin, a big black dog suddenly jumped out from the side and barked demonstratively at him. George stared at the big black dog with his eyes and activated his psychic ability. The big black dog was stunned for a moment, and then wagged its tail. Yeah, stop! At this time, the door of the wooden house was pushed open, and Hagrid revealed his huge body. It's you, little boss, welcome here. I just made some rock biscuits. You can eat some with this kid. That would be an honor. There was a surprised look on George's face. He didn't expect that apart from him, Hagrid would have other guests here today. Ginny, why are you here? Don't you have classes in the afternoon? Entering the cabin, he saw Ginny sitting on a stool taller than him. As far as he knew, Gryffindor only had Friday afternoon off from classes, and today was Wednesday. George, you're right, I'm going to get ready for class. Ginny jumped down from the stool in a panic and hurriedly ran out of the cabin. Hagrid put the rock cake he had just made on the table and said with a smile. The little girl wanted to ask me when Harry would usually come over, but you scared me away. Then you can solve her problem together. Well, the rock biscuits smell so good. It's a pity that I just finished lunch in the auditorium before coming here. It's such a pity. George touched his bulging belly and pushed back the rock cake in front of him with regret on his face. Hagrid's rock biscuits were made to fit his own teeth. They were so hard they could be used as bricks, and he didn't want to knock out his teeth. Seeing that George's belly was indeed quite round, and he had obviously eaten a lot of food, Hagrid also showed a regretful look. He picked up the rock cake and finished it in 3 or 2 bites. Wait for next time. Be sure to save your stomach next time you come over. Hagrid, I am very interested in magical animals and have read some books on this subject. I have a few questions to ask you. George twitched his mouth, and then stated the purpose of this visit. He can use his psychic abilities to communicate with magical animals, which does not mean that he can definitely tame magical animals for his own use, but it just has a greater advantage than ordinary wizards. Just like the magical zoologist Newt Scamander, it is said that he is also born with the ability to communicate with magical animals. But Newt was able to conquer so many powerful magical animals, mainly because he knew enough about the habits of magical animals and could prescribe the right medicine. It's great that you are interested in magical animals. I can tell you everything I know. Hagrid has a simple character. When he heard that George had the same interests as him, he immediately started talking non-stop. George was listening here, and the main body was taking notes simultaneously on the other side. On the one hand, learning about magical animals is to tame powerful magical animals for one's own use, and on the other hand, it also values the resources of the Forbidden Forest. Many precious magical animals are full of treasures and are essential materials for making magic items and potions. There are many of these precious magical animals in the Forbidden Forest. For example, the poison of the acromantula is worth 100 gold galleons per pint. There are at least 100 acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest. When it comes to making money, the potion master, who claims to be the most profitable, actually doesn't make as much money as the master of magical beasts. It's just that most masters of magical animals love and care for magical animals and do not deliberately use magical animals to make money. Moreover, it is not easy to become a master of magical animals. Without certain strength, it is easy to be eaten by magical animals. Newt was born with the ability to communicate with magical animals, and Hagrid was half giant. In fact, it's not just about money, because sometimes you can get things that you can't buy with money, but you can get them with rare magical animals. It also symbolizes an important exchange resource. On Thursday, there is Transfiguration and Defense against the Dark Arts in the morning, Charms in the afternoon, and a history of magic class in the evening. George scored another 40 extra points for Slytherin, making Slytherin's score unparalleled, far behind the other 3 houses, and proved with his strength that what he said that morning was not a big lie. Because of this, he gradually gained the reputation of Slytherin star in the school, a rising star in Slytherin. In fact, Slytherin is not weak in overall scores every year, and with Snape's favoritism, it can win the House Cup every year. It's just that last year, Hermione, the academic bully, came and scored heavily. Even with Harry and Ron dragging down and Snape deducting points, the gap was not too big in the end, allowing Dumbledore to successfully counterattack with the Philosopher's Stone incident. And this year, George was able to score better than Hermione, not only in other subjects, but also in history of magic, without Snape's deduction. Even if Dumbledore was partial to him, a difference of 100 or 200 points was acceptable, but it would be difficult to make up for a difference of several hundred points. The Dean of Slytherin, Professor Snape, had the same idea as him. Does anyone know what ingredients are needed for the potion to treat boils? George, can you answer it? In the potions class on Friday morning, when George stood up to answer the question for the 5th time, he felt a little embarrassed. It's narcissus root powder, aconitum naviculatum, and porcupine quills, Professor. It seems that not everyone is stupid. 5 points for Slytherin. Snape glanced at the whole classroom. Except for George, all the other little wizards lowered their heads. Next, let's try to make this potion. I hope you can be less stupid. While making the potion step by step according to the steps, George couldn't help but sigh that Snape was indeed completely different from Professor McGonagall. In fact, the questions Snape asked just now were a little beyond the scope. Except for George, who could look up the herbal and magic potion textbooks at any time, it was difficult for other little wizards to answer them. You say he is partial, and it is true that only George can raise his hand to answer. If you get serious, even Dumbledore can't say anything. But George is sure that Snape just wants him to brush up his score, otherwise he wouldn't ask 5 questions in one class. Next time he makes the potion, he will probably give him points. Sure enough, when he made the potion first, Snape came to his side like a big bat. An excellent potion. 5 points for Slytherin. Chapter 38. Selecting an agent. During the weekend, George spent most of his time practicing the new spells he had learned. He occasionally took time to find Hagrid to learn some knowledge about magical animals and communicate with the magical animals raised by Hagrid. During this period, he did not see Harry and Ron. It was said that they were being punished for driving and crashing the Whomping Willow. In the second week, he was still madly brushing points while absorbing as much magical knowledge as possible, learning and practicing new magic. On the Marvel side, after more than 10 days of investigation, some clues gradually emerged. That evening, George rode a modified motorcycle from the mutant school in the suburbs to the Bronx near the city. On the way, when he encountered a test, he showed his expensive fake ID to get through. In these 10 days of investigation, in addition to roughly understanding the situation of dozens of large and small families in the Bronx, he also paid a high price to find a local fake ID to make him a fake identity. Of course, this fake identity can only fool ordinary policemen at ordinary times. If you encounter the CIA, SHIELD, and the National Bureau of Investigation, you will definitely not be able to fool them. Not to mention using this identity to open an account, deposit the money into it, and then use it to buy Stark's shares. So he didn't plan to buy Stark's shares himself from the beginning. His body was a product of the laboratory, and he didn't have any identity proof at all. He couldn't get away with it with a fake certificate. He wanted to find an agent, but he couldn't just find one casually. First of all, this person must have a certain status, otherwise helping him buy Stark's shares may be suspected and attract the attention of various organizations. In fact, he felt that even if he robbed the gangs in the entire Bronx and used all the cash to buy Stark Group's shares, it would be a drop in the bucket for the giant Stark Group. After all, what he could rob was some cash, and at most he could force the bosses to withdraw the liquid funds in their accounts, but it was impossible to take away all the assets of the gangs. Maybe this cash is already an astronomical figure for the poorest and most chaotic Bronx, but for the Stark Group, it may not be as valuable as the artworks in Tony Stark's mansion. The money of the truly rich is unimaginable to the poor. A painting in Tony Stark's room may be worth hundreds of millions, but for him, hundreds of millions are actually enough for him to lead those mutant children to a stable life. He doesn't need to do anything big now, and he doesn't need to go against major organizations. He just needs a stable life to study magic and improve his strength. If he wasn't worried about the invasion of the Chitauri in a few years, if the Avengers failed to resist and the entire Earth fell, he wouldn't stay near New York. Secondly, the agent must have a concern for the Bronx and cannot leave here. Otherwise, if so much money is left to the other party to manage, the other party will run away with the money. Where can he find it? People die for money and birds die for food. He doesn't believe that people will be loyal to him after just a few months of getting along. He doesn't have that kind of kingly spirit. Fortunately, these 10 days are not in vain. He has gradually come up with a goal that may be feasible. Today is just the right time to watch a good show. If everything goes well, then the agent can be confirmed. After parking the motorcycle, he found an empty alley, wrapped himself in a black robe, put on the most common mask that can be bought on the roadside, and used his full power. His special shoes with iron plates immediately lifted him up and slowly floated up above the alley. After such a period of development, especially under the influence of wizard blood, his control of magnetic force has also made great progress, and he can barely control objects weighing more than 100 kilograms. It has exceeded the evaluation standard of the laboratory base for his potential limit. If he meets X-24 now, he can play with him with his ability. More than 100 kilograms can make X-24, who is covered with adamantium alloy, walk unsteadily. So when he used his full power, he could barely make the special shoes inlaid with iron plates carry him up. Of course, as for speed, it can only be said that it is not as fast as walking. If it is a battle, it is a living target. But in certain specific places, it is still very useful. For example, now, he can easily go to the roof, move over the roof to avoid various surveillance and sight, sneak into some tightly sealed venues very easily, and it is not easy to be tracked. On the roof of the 7th floor of the strip club controlled by the Cheeble family, an old man in his 70s sat in a wheelchair, looking at the middle-aged man who was beaten to death in front of him, and said with some regret, "Leon, you are really good, I am really optimistic about you, and I have always treated you as my godson. It's a pity that you must die here today. Mr. Cheeble, I really didn't betray you. I was wronged. I have always treated you as a father. How could I betray you? You have to believe me." The middle-aged man struggled to get up with blood on his face, trying his best to prove his loyalty. He was originally the child of a drug addict. His mother secretly left when he was young because she couldn't stand this hopeless life. When he was 13 years old, he accidentally saved Mr. Cheeble, who was hunted by a hostile family. Since then, he was appreciated by Mr. Cheeble and joined the Cheeble family, living his dream life. For 30 years, he relied on his intelligence and wisdom to help the Cheeble family develop from a small family to one of the 13 families in the Bronx. However, he was executed as the mastermind who wanted to seize the dominance of the Cheeble family for just one assassination, which was really unacceptable. He has a beautiful and loving wife, many brothers who have been through life and death with him, and a lovely newborn daughter. He has dedicated most of his life to this family. I know you didn't betray me. The assassination was originally a play directed and acted by me. Otherwise, with your current status and reputation in the family, I really can't just execute you like this. Cheeble sighed with a complicated look in his eyes. Hearing what Cheeble said, Leon suddenly widened his eyes and murmured in disbelief. Why? Why did you do this? I had no choice. I'm old. The doctor said that with my wounded body, I only have 2 years to live at most. But my son has just turned 20 and has just taken over the family affairs. His ability and reputation are not mature yet. Cheeble coughed and looked at Leon with some sadness. He was not without feelings for Leon, but no matter how capable Leon was and how mediocre his son was, he would never let Leon replace his son. You are worried that I will replace the young master in the future, but you should understand my loyalty to you. I would never do that. Leon sat on the ground, as if all his strength was drained. Cheeble pushed the wheelchair forward and shook his head. Leon, I believe in your character, but not your subordinates. Sometimes, you can't sit in my position if you don't want to. Your subordinates will push you to sit up. Chapter 39. Codename, Death. My last request is that for the sake of the many things I have done for the family, please spare the lives of my wife and daughters so that my brothers can continue to serve the family. After helping the family for so many years, Leon also knew that the situation mentioned by Cheeble was not impossible. Because his men had always hoped that he could become the head of the Cheeble family, and had repeatedly persuaded him to change the Cheeble family to the Leon family. So at this moment, he no longer complained about anything, but just knelt in front of Cheeble and lowered his head and begged. However, Cheeble shook his head cruelly again. Leon, I once heard a sentence from a Chinese guy I killed, and I always thought this sentence made sense. It's called, cutting weeds without eradicating the roots, they grow again when the spring breeze blows. If my son wants to successfully inherit the industry that I have worked hard for, there must be no potential threat. You have to understand a father's good intentions. I'm going to kill you. Leon used all his strength and suddenly jumped towards Sibel. He was kicked away by the strong man next to Sibel just in the middle of the lunge. If he was not so weak normally, now he was already covered in wounds. Leon, stop struggling, go in peace, I will personally take people to deal with your wife and daughter. Maybe you and them will meet again in heaven. Oh no, people like us will definitely go to hell after death, so we may not be able to meet again. The strong man stepped forward and trampled Leon under his feet, pulled out a pistol and pointed it at his head with a grin on his face. Leon lay on the ground and roared angrily. Cheeble, I really regret not listening to my brothers. If there really is a hell, I will definitely climb out of it and take you and your son down with me. If there are demons in hell, I am willing to use my soul in exchange to break out of hell and take revenge. It's a pity that there is no hell or demon in this world, otherwise I would have died countless times, after all, my hands are stained with so much blood. The reality is so cruel. Only people like me can enjoy glory and wealth, and my children will inherit my glory and wealth. Cheeble didn't care at all about Leon's curse. He had heard too many such words. However, at this moment, an interesting voice suddenly came from above the water tank on the roof. I'm not a devil, and I don't want your soul, but if you are willing to cooperate with me, then I am willing to fulfill your wish. Everyone turned to look at the top of the water tank. At some point, a mysterious man wearing a death mask and a robe stood there. Where did this guy come from? Kill him. Cheeble narrowed his eyes and immediately ordered. The dozen or so men guarding him immediately drew out their pistols skillfully and pointed them at the mysterious man, preparing to kill him on the spot. However, at the moment when they were aiming, their pistols suddenly separated from their hands, as if controlled by an invisible force, floating in the air between their eyebrows, and the bullets were automatically loaded. I advise you not to move, otherwise I cannot guarantee that the gun will go off. George walked down from the top of the water tank step by step as if stepping on air, and then came to Leon who was lying on the ground unable to get up, and looked at him condescendingly. Your answer? Yes, this Leon is currently an agent that he thinks is pretty good. Once he helps Leon take over the Cheeble family, Leon will become one of the most powerful people in the underground world of the Bronx, and he is fully qualified to buy Stark's stock without being suspected. And if he cleans up the other 12 families, Leon can also annex them openly. When Leon has such a large territory, he will not be able to run away with his wife and daughter, and they can cooperate for a long time. In the later stage, he helped to find out the information, and it also helped a lot in dealing with the pursuit of Yakil's company. He had always felt that what Professor X had done was unwise. Why did he separate the mutants from humans and give them a new name? This is not to make the entire human race uncomfortable. Anyway, the term mutants has been forgotten by humans now, so forget it completely. They are humans with some special abilities. Naturally, they can also cooperate with humans to deal with those evil scientists and terrorists. Leon looked at the incredible scene on the top of the building and was stunned for 2 seconds, then replied with firm eyes. As long as you can save my family and brothers, then my life is yours. I don't want your life, I just need you to do something for me in the future. George snapped his fingers, and all the suspended pistols fired at the same time. Shelby's men fell to the rooftop without any resistance. Sir, whatever you need to do, I can do it for you. You don't need to cooperate with a loser. Cheeble, the only survivor, saw that all his men were killed, and he suddenly broke out in a cold sweat while sitting in his wheelchair. He tries to convince George to let him go. However, George smiled and shook his head. No, you're too old. Letting someone like Cheeble serve as an agent may be useless in 2 or 3 years. It would be too troublesome to find someone again by then, and his character is not as guaranteed as Lion's. Leave it to you to solve it yourself. The thin blade flew out of George's pocket and easily cut the rope binding Leon's hands. Leon stood up, picked up the pistol of the fallen man, came to Chibir, and shot him away without saying a word of mercy. Thank you, what should I call you? Looking at Chibal lying in a pool of blood, Leon was silent for 5 seconds, then turned around and thanked George sincerely. If it weren't for George's help, he would have died today, and his wife, daughter, and those brothers who had been through life and death together would definitely not have survived. So his thanks were also from the heart. No need to thank me, I saved you for my own purpose, we are in a cooperative relationship. You can call me by my code name, Death. George touched the mask on his face and waved his hand. Farmers and snakes, repaying kindness with hatred, this kind of thing is not uncommon. He doesn't think that if he saves the other party once, the other party will be loyal to him wholeheartedly. Besides, the other party's growth environment and experience are not likely to be good people. What do you need me to do? Leon is a smart man, he understands what George wants to express. In fact, George's magical method just now, and this outfit that hides his identity, he is not without doubts in his heart. Not now, I will come to you when I need you. George pointed to the iron gate at the rooftop entrance. Your boss's people should react soon, we have to leave here first. Already here. Leon's expression changed, he heard a lot of footsteps coming from the rooftop stairs. At this time, his physical condition was very poor, even if he had a gun in his hand, it was impossible to deal with so many people. So he could only turn his head and look at George. Now only George, who has magical powers, can save him. Chapter 40. Naturally, George heard the footsteps. He hesitated for a moment, walked directly to the entrance of the rooftop, reached out to close the rooftop iron door, and started casting a spell on the handle. Flavi. The transformation spell was activated, and a fist-sized lock successfully transformed, locking the iron door firmly. Naturally, he is not afraid of the ordinary people below, but if too many people are killed, they will inevitably leave traces when the time comes. Let's go. After locking the iron door and temporarily blocking the rooftop to stop those who wanted to go up to the rooftop, George cast a levitating spell on Leon. Wingardim, Leviosa. Leon saw George's hands constantly changing strange gestures, and then pointed at himself. His body actually floated like a balloon, and his heart was extremely shocked. This was the first time he had experienced such a magical thing, and his awe for George became even greater. Reaching out to grab the floating Leon's shoulders, George jumped from the rooftop of the 6th floor. At the same time, he activated his abilities and landed steadily in the dark alley. The levitation spell was one of the basic spells in the 1st grade, and it was also the spell he focused on learning and researching during this period. Although he cannot make himself fly, he can cooperate with his magnetism to move larger objects. It is also a good control skill against the enemy, especially against the X-24 type. A levitation spell reduces the weight of the X-24, and magnets allow it to be manipulated as a toy. Do you still need my help later? You've helped me enough, I can handle it myself. Leon gritted his teeth and replied. Chibir is dead. With his reputation and influence, it is not difficult to turn the Chibir family into the Leon family if you want. As for Chibal's son, he is just a loser who only knows how to eat, drink and have fun. Mainly, he doesn't want to owe this mysterious person any more favors, because he knows that these have to be repaid, and until now, he still doesn't know what the other party wants him to do. Then get rid of the Chibal family as soon as possible. Don't look for me. I will naturally come to you if necessary. George nodded, then slowly rose and disappeared into the night sky. After helping so much, if Leon still dies, then this kind of waste is not suitable to be his agent. On the other side, the clones in the Harry Potter world also had an opportunity to get closer to Snape, which was the first flying lesson after the charms class on Thursday afternoon of the 2nd week. As the master in the school second only to Dumbledore, Snape's self-created Divine Edge Shadowless Curse can be called the magic version of the 6-medium sword. Once hit by the Divine Edge Shadowless Curse, it cannot be cured by normal healing magic because of the cursed nature of black magic. He was the professor who he felt most needed to have a good relationship with, especially since he was in Slytherin House. So in addition to usually scoring points for Slytherin to win the Academy Cup, helping the Slytherin Quidditch team win is also one of the things he has to do. Quidditch, as Wizard's favorite sport, can also help him improve his reputation among students. The only drawback might be that it would waste his time learning spells. But after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not a waste. Using a broomstick to practice flying would allow him to better adapt to flying in the future. Flying was a skill that he must master. Although apparition is good, it will be interfered by magic such as anti-apparition. Under special circumstances, flying is more convenient. As for why he is so confident in his Quidditch skills? He had never touched a flying broomstick before, so he was not sure whether this body had any talent in this area. But it doesn't matter, his physical strength already has certain advantages, and more importantly, he has a trump card that he has prepared long ago. First-year Slytherins take flying lessons with Gryffindor. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the young wizards from the two colleges had already gathered on the lawn outside the castle. Among them, those children born into wizard families were excitedly talking about their thrilling experiences riding broomsticks. Most of them are just bragging stories, about competing in speed with an eagle, flying across the sea to France, almost hitting a muggle plane, etc. George, I'm not as good as you in other subjects, but I won't let you score any more points in flying class. At this time, Ginny walked up to George with Colin, patting her chest with confidence on her face. George smiled when he saw this. I've never ridden a broomstick before, so I'm afraid I won't get any points. Regarding broomsticks, Ginny definitely has a talent that is no less than Harry's. Moreover, when she was 6 years old, Ginny broke into the broom shed at home while her brothers were not paying attention and secretly rode their broomsticks. She had never been discovered. However, I am afraid that Ginny will be disappointed this time. Okay, kids, stand in 2 rows now and I'll hand out broomsticks to you. At this time, Ms. Huochi, the teacher in charge of flying lessons, came over dragging more than 20 old broomsticks. It's so broken. After getting his own broomstick and looking at some branches poking out in random directions, George couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. The history of these broomsticks can be traced back to the Sidesweep series decades ago, and their speed and performance are far inferior to today's Nimbus series. Put your brooms on the ground first, and then learn from me the spell to control them. Remember, the key lies in your beliefs, don't be afraid, the less confident you are, the less they will respond to you. Ms. Hooch first spent half an hour instructing the young wizards on how to correctly use the spells and techniques of the flying broom, and then entered the practical stage. Now, stretch out your right hand, place it on the broom handle, and start chanting the spell. The young wizard did as he was told. For those young wizards who had experience using flying brooms, the brooms flew into their hands immediately. And for those young wizards who saw flying brooms for the first time, there were all kinds of problems. Some flying brooms rolled on the ground and couldn't get up, and some staggered in the air and fell down. What's worse, some just lay there motionless, obviously they didn't chant the spell correctly. It doesn't seem to be very difficult. George stretched out his hand, and the flying broom appeared in his hand instantly, which surprised him a little. He guessed that it was probably not because of the high talent of this body itself, but because his mental ability greatly improved his mental strength, giving him a certain advantage in this regard. In fact, not only the flying broom, but also because of his strong mental power when learning other magic, he was also very efficient. Sometimes he couldn't help thinking that his secondary psychic ability already had such a good bonus. If Professor X had wizard blood, how terrible would the efficiency of learning magic be? Then think about it, if it was Phoenix Lady Jean, it didn't seem necessary, because her Phoenix Force was one of the most terrifying powers. Okay, next, let's try to fly. When I whistle, you kick your legs and leave the ground. Push hard. Seeing that everyone had grabbed the flying broom in their hands after a try, Ms. Hooch entered the last stage of teaching. At this time, George also controlled a hair-thin wire to come out of his sleeve and entangled it on the flying broom. Chapter 41. A Rare Genius. Yes, the iron wire is George's trump card for controlling the flying broom. Whether the flying broom flies well or not mainly depends on whether the wizard is proficient in operating the flying broom. By wrapping a circle of iron wire on the flying broom, in addition to relying on magic to control the flying broom, he can also use magnetism to make more detailed adjustments, double protection. In fact, with the weight of his clone of dozens of kilograms, the magnetism alone can fly, but it is not as fast as the flying broom. This operation is also used on his magic wand. There is a circle of iron wire at the end of his magic wand, the purpose is to be able to summon it back instantly after the magic wand is out of hand. Hold the broom steady, rise a few feet, then lean forward slightly and fall vertically back to the ground. Listen to my whistle, 3 2 1. As Ms. Hooch whistled, the little wizards all stomped their feet and flew into the air on their flying brooms. However, most of them were not very stable after flying in the air, and they maintained it carefully one by one, but there were also some who flew very well and quickly because they had experience, such as Ginny. Ginny, very good, you fly quite well. Ginny's outstanding performance soon attracted Hooch's attention, and he couldn't help but praise her loudly, ready to give Gryffindor extra points, but she was soon interrupted by a cry of surprise. Turning her head to the right Slytherin side, her face suddenly showed an incredible look. Oh, Merlin, this is the starfish hanging upside down, the Wollongong Z-shape flying technique, the sloth hugging the tree rolling, and the Wanski feint. This is impossible. What did she see? She saw George, the star of Slytherin, who actually used a difficult Quidditch move that only world-class Quidditch players can master. Like the starfish hanging upside down, it is a move that only top flying broom goalkeepers can do. When the quaffle is about to enter but there is no time to defend it, immediately hang upside down on the broomstick with one foot and block the quaffle by spreading your limbs. Wollongong Z-shaped flight is a superb technique for the chaser to move forward at high speed in a zigzag shape to confuse the opponent's chaser. Sloth hugging tree roll, when the bludger attacks, the player hangs on the broomstick, holds the broomstick handle tightly with both hands and feet, and quickly rotates the broomstick to bounce the bludger like a drill. Wanski feint, the seeker pretends to see the snitch far below and rushes to the ground, asking the opponent's seeker to imitate him. But the former stops diving when it is about to hit the ground, so that the opponent has no time to react and hits the ground and feints. This move requires the seeker to have extreme control over the broomstick. If you learn any of these 4 moves, you can apply for any position of seeker, chaser, beater, and keeper in the national Quidditch team. Even she couldn't do all 4 moves smoothly, let alone use the sweeping series broom used for school teaching. You should know that the sweeping series broom used for school teaching has a history of several decades. It is natural to fly in class, but if the speed is too fast, it will tremble and be difficult to control. However, look at George, not only can he control it, but he can also do these 4 difficult classic moves. Slytherin plus 20 points, you can practice freely, George, come with me. After George landed smoothly, Huo-Chi shouted excitedly, walked forward and pulled George towards the castle. Is this really your first time riding a flying broom? She asked incredulously as she walked. George pretended to be a little shy and nodded. Is it impossible to ride where I live, but I have read some books and related introductions about Quidditch. He knew his plan was successful. With the strength of his body and the stable control of the flying broom by magnetism, he could do ballet and Thomas turns on the flying broom without any problem, not to mention the 4 moves just now. Oh, really? This is incredible. Hooch was a little incoherent after hearing George's answer. In the office of the Dean of Slytherin, Snape was sitting on a chair writing his research experience on the newly created potion. He was suddenly disturbed by the urgent knock on the door. He couldn't help but frowned and waved his wand to open the door. Ms. Hooch, is there something so important that you need to be so anxious? Seeing that the visitors were Hooch, the flying class teacher, and the most outstanding student in his college, he relaxed his brows a little. Hooch excitedly pushed George in front of Snape. Professor Snape, your Slytherin has a Quidditch genius that is rare in 1,000 years. You can't believe it. He used it the first time he rode a flying broom. Is everything you said true? After hearing Hooch's words, Snape, who always had a blank expression, became calm. As the Dean of Slytherin, he had a very deep affection for Slytherin College. He had always been upset about Slytherin's loss to Gryffindor last year, especially Gryffindor with Harry. If George really had such a strong flying broom talent, then Slytherin would not lose again in the next 7 years. I'm not old enough to be dazzled, and many children in your college saw it. Hooch seemed a little angry at Snape's questioning. Snape said quickly. I'm not questioning you, I'm just a little surprised. He turned his head to look at George, revealing a smile that was uglier than crying. George, you're very good, always very good. I will personally arrange for you to join the Slytherin Quidditch team on Saturday. Gryffindor can make an exception, and so can we Slytherin. That. Professor, I don't really want to join the Quidditch team. George pretended to be a little embarrassed and replied. Hearing George's words, Hooch and Snape were both stunned, and then asked almost at the same time. Why? You know, joining the Quidditch team is the dream of every little wizard, and George has such a high-flying broom, he is simply a natural Quidditch player. George looked up at Snape and coughed. It's like this, because compared to Quidditch, I prefer to study magic, especially defense against the dark arts, and Professor Lockhart's defense against the dark arts class is so I need more time to study by myself. But after joining Quidditch, I must train frequently, so I don't have enough time. Alas, self-study is still difficult. What you said makes sense. Compared to Quidditch, learning magic is the foundation. Lockhart is indeed a fool. Snape couldn't help but fall into deep thought after hearing this. In his opinion, learning magic is definitely more important than Quidditch. He doesn't have much interest in Quidditch. As the Dean, he naturally hopes that Slytherin can win the Quidditch Cup. So, if you join the Slytherin team, I will try my best not to ask them to train with you. In the future, I will take half a day every weekend to help you with the Defense Against the Dark Arts course. Chapter 42. The most suitable one is the strongest. If that's the case, then there's no problem. Hearing Snape's answer, George nodded without hesitation. He went around in such a circle for this purpose. Lockhart could only learn the Oblivion Charm, but everything else was a mess. For dark magic, he still had to ask Snape. And he was tutoring alone once a week, which was equivalent to him becoming Snape's closed disciple. As time went by, and his relationship came to an end, it was not impossible for him to become a foster father directly. A person is shameless and invincible. In order to improve his strength, it is not impossible to have a foster father. Seeing George agreeing so readily, Snape was stunned for a moment. He felt like he was being tricked for some reason, but after thinking about it, it didn't seem to matter. There was a genius in his college, and he was willing to be more partial. When the notice reached Snape, Hooch took George back to the lawn outside the castle. As soon as George came back, he was surrounded by the little wizards, asking what he was taken to by Ms. Huochi. He didn't hide everything about this. He directly said that he met Dean Snape and was admitted to the Slytherin Quidditch team, but he didn't mention tutoring. This answer naturally made the little wizards explode. The little wizards in Slytherin were immediately elated, while the little wizards in Gryffindor were a little depressed. I thought I could beat him in the broomstick class, but I didn't expect to lose even in this aspect. Ginny looked at George, who was surrounded, and sighed. Colin on the side was not frustrated at all, but raised his camera and took photos. No way, he is George, and he works really hard. I heard that he is the last one to leave the common room every night, and he is also our friend. You're right, at least it's George, not anyone else. Ginny also had a smile on her face. George is not just a little better than them, but he crushes them in all aspects, and he works so hard, it's hard to make people jealous. After the flying lesson, looking at the back of George walking to the auditorium with other little wizards, Ms. Hooch put away all the broomsticks with her wand and couldn't help but murmured. No, I have to talk to Bagman about this. Maybe we can reverse our position in international Quidditch these years. Ludo Bagman, now the director of the Department of Magical Sports and Sports of the British Ministry of Magic, is also a senior on the Quidditch team she met before retiring to teach at Hogwarts. In recent years, the English Quidditch team has almost suffered repeated defeats, and is almost at the bottom of the international Quidditch team. If a once-in-a-millennium talent like George joins the team, it might be possible to reverse the current situation of the English Quidditch team. As for George being still young and still in school. Recently, a fifth-year student at Durmstrang Academy of Magic named Victor Krum was admitted to the Bulgarian Quidditch team because of his genius as a seeker. Naturally, George can do the same. She felt that George's talent in Quidditch was definitely above that of Victor Krum. George joined the Slytherin team, which just in time for Bagman to come and watch this year's Hogwarts Quidditch match. In the evening, the news that George was admitted to the Slytherin team as an exception spread throughout the school, including the difficult moves he used in flying lessons. Many young wizards who are obsessed with Quidditch know those well-known moves very well. This also raised George's reputation throughout Slytherin and the entire school to a higher level. The senior Slytherins spoke to him more politely. Of course, not all Slytherins were happy about this, such as Malfoy, who had just made his father spend a lot of money to join the team. But apparently there was nothing he could do except sulk. Time soon came to Saturday. Early that morning, George was called over by Snape, who wanted to give George extra lessons. Make-up classes every Saturday morning, which is what he promised George. What I'm teaching now is the repel spell. This spell is a basic spell, but don't underestimate the basic spell. As long as it is used well, the basic spell can also exert greater power than the high-level spells. Just like this repelling spell, if used well, it can even repel the fire dragon. Under Snape's strict but detailed guidance, George truly gained a deeper understanding of dark magic and magical combat. He used to think that Avada's gnawing big melon and the severe fire curse should be the most powerful curses. One of them will kill you, and the other has a very wide range and can even burn down an entire city. But through Snape's explanation, he understood that this was not the case. Facing different enemies in different scenarios, the most suitable spell was the strongest spell. Sometimes Avada's gnawing melon and fire spell may not be as effective as a basic enchantment. Facing small and flexible enemies, the death curse cannot hit at all, and a freezing curse with a larger range but less power is needed. There are also magical animals like fire dragons with extremely high magic resistance. Even if they are hit by the death curse and the fire curse, it is no big deal. On the contrary, the eye disease curse that targets eye attacks can play a very good role. The same is true for the knockback spell, because it uses magical power to form a forward physical air pressure attack in front of you, so even if you have high magic resistance, you are not immune. A repelling spell like that used by a master like Dumbledore could really send the fire dragon flying away. In the afternoon, Snape personally took George to the Quidditch pitch outside the castle. However, there seemed to be not only the Slytherin team but also the Gryffindor team on the court at this time, and something was obviously not right. The members of the Slytherin team were all paralyzed with laughter. Captain Flint was laughing so hard that he couldn't stand upright, using his new broom to support himself. Malfoy was on all fours, beating the ground with his 2 fists. On the other side, all the members of the Gryffindor team gathered around Ron, as well as Hermione and Colin, who was holding a camera to take pictures. At this time, Ron was spitting out big shiny slugs. "What's going on?" Snape asked grimly. Seeing Snape's appearance, the Slytherin players immediately stood up straight in fear. Captain Flint hurriedly said, "Dean, I came to the stadium with the note you approved, but Wood was unwilling to let it go." Their second year Ron Weasley took the opportunity to attack Malfoy, but he failed to use the spell and it rebounded on him. Today the court belongs to the Slytherin team. Ron Weasley used magic to attack his classmates in school. Gryffindor deducted 10 points. Snape gave the punishment expressionlessly, and then after seeing Harry who was in charge of Ron, he immediately added with disgust, "Potter, you are right next to Ron. Why don't you stop him? Do you think that if he makes a mistake, you will be better?" Another 10 points from Gryffindor. Harry, who was already unhappy because Gryffindor was deducted points, was stunned when he heard Snape's words. George couldn't help but twitch when he saw this. To be honest, he really sympathized with Harry. But there is no way, who makes you not Harley? Chapter 43, Scheming Boy George. Professor Snape, we have booked the entire Quidditch pitch in advance, and it was because Malfoy called Hermione a mudblood that Ron attacked Malfoy. Facing the terrifying Snape, Wood and others did not dare to refute even if they were angry, but Harry was unwilling to give up. Snape's eyes became even more severe when he heard this. "How dare you lie? Malfoy, did you call Hermione a mudblood?" At this moment, George suddenly spoke before Malfoy and asked. Malfoy felt that with Snape around, Wood and the others did not dare to be presumptuous. They held their heads high and said proudly, "She is a mudblood. Hogwarts should not accept a mudblood as a student. It's not up to you to decide who Hogwarts accepts as students." Upon hearing Malfoy's remarks, Snape immediately turned his head and scolded him sternly. You must know that his favorite witch, Harry's mother, Lily Evans, was also a child born into a Muggle family. Seeing that his goal was achieved, George retreated calmly. Malfoy was obviously frightened by Snape, who had always been tolerant of him, and quickly shut up. Snape looked at Harry again. "Cancel the deduction just now, but Potter, because you contradicted the teacher, Gryffindor will be deducted 5 points for this." Harry wanted to retort, but Hermione grabbed his arm. "Just now it was deducted 20 points, now it is only deducted 5 points, which is much better." Vomit. At this moment Ron opened his mouth, and a bunch of slugs came out of his mouth again. The curse stops immediately. George stepped forward and waved his wand, and a blue magic beam hit Ron, and the slug in Ron's mouth disappeared immediately. During the tutoring session, Snape said that if you encounter a black magic that you don't know about counter spells, you can try the universal breaking spell first. Now that I've tried it, I didn't expect it to work. Thank you, George. Ron, who returned to normal, immediately thanked him. Harry and Hermione also nodded towards George. They knew that if George hadn't talked too much just now and tempted Malfoy to tell the truth, Gryffindor would have been deducted 15 more points. George blinked quietly, then stepped back to Snape. I want to try the universal breaking spell I just learned. Snape heard this and said calmly. George helps his classmate with the treatment, Slytherin gets 5 points. The heads of the little wizards of the Slytherin team, which had just been drooped, were raised again. Okay, this is over. Next, the Slytherin team will train 2 new players. You can leave. After hearing Snape's words of chasing people away, Wood immediately let everyone out of the Quidditch pitch. However, after leaving the stadium, Harry, Ron, and Hermione quietly returned and hid in the audience stand to take a peek. They didn't want to peek at the Slytherin team's information, but simply wanted to know who would be the new Seeker, George or Malfoy. They found out yesterday through Ginny that George was going to join the Slytherin team. At that time, they thought that George must be Slytherin's Seeker, just like Harry last year, but today they learned that Malfoy had already become Slytherin because his father was the owner of the team and had changed to the latest Nimbus 2001. New Seeker. So they are worried that George's joining the team may not go smoothly. You should all know about George. He can use a teaching broomstick to perform difficult moves that are difficult for players on the international Quidditch team to perform. So I decided that he would be the team's new Seeker. After Wood and others left, Snape began to announce George's position on the team. When Malfoy heard this, his expression suddenly changed. Dean, we agreed that I would be the new Seeker. You promised my father. Darian Pusey and Terence Higgs have withdrawn from the team to focus on their studies. Malfoy, you will serve as the new Chaser. Snape replied without hesitation. This was the arrangement he had thought of last night. Little Malfoy does have a good talent for flying broomsticks, and his father's generosity has greatly improved the strength of the Slytherin team. Then it is very reasonable and in the interests of Slytherin to replace Terence Higgs, who lost to first-year Harry in terms of strength, and let little Malfoy take over. And now that there is a broomstick genius like George, the most important position of Seeker will naturally be given to George. However, after all, little Malfoy brought a lot of value, so he replaced the dispensable chaser Adrian Pusey. Dean, I don't agree. I want to be the Seeker to compete with Potter. Malfoy immediately shouted. Now everyone knows that he is going to be the Seeker of the Slytherin team. If it were replaced by George, everyone would be in a big loss. And he always wanted to overpower Harry. Only the same Seeker had hope. Dean, you know George is friends with Harry and has a good relationship with the people in Gryffindor. If you let him be the Seeker, he will definitely give Harry a try. Malfoy, do you think we Slytherin wizards can't be friends with Gryffindors? At this time George walked in front of Malfoy. I think let alone friends, as long as it's suitable, it's not impossible to find a Gryffindor witch as my wife in the future. We are all wizards from Hogwarts. It is normal to compete with each other, but it is unreasonable that we cannot be friends or lovers just because we are from different colleges. Who stipulates that only people from one college can be friends and can be married? The other members of the Slytherin team were all shocked when they heard George's bold remarks. They thought that George would be severely reprimanded by Snape next. Dean, you see what I said was right, if George was a Seeker, he would definitely let Harry go. He actually wanted to find a group of mudbloods from Gryffindor as his wife. A wizard from Slytherin wants to find a wizard from Gryffindor as his wife. This is simply the biggest joke I have heard today. Shut up, upside down. Snape cast a spell with an ugly face and hung Malfoy upside down. Either be a chaser or get out of the team. Little guy, fight me. George's mouth slightly raised when he saw this. He just said that deliberately to draw out Malfoy's words. Malfoy didn't know that the biggest pain in Snape's heart was that because he was sorted into different colleges and because he was proud of his Slytherin status, he said some excessive words, which led to Lily being snatched away by Potter. Malfoy's words were simply a slap in Snape's face. Dean, I think Malfoy doesn't seem to be convinced. How about this, let's have a competition. Whoever grabs the golden snitch first will be the Slytherin Seeker. He wanted to make Malfoy convinced and never dare to provoke him again in the future, and establish his position in Slytherin. The golden bell fell. With a wave of his wand, Snape put Malfoy down. Malfoy's parents had a close relationship with him. In addition to being Death Eaters, they were also classmates. He almost became Malfoy's godfather. So if Malfoy hadn't always hurt his heart today, he wouldn't have been so strict with Malfoy. Okay, let's have a game. The winner will be the Seeker and the loser will be the Chaser. Chapter 44. Little Malfoy, Master. This is the golden snitch. When I let it go, it will fly at high speed in the stadium. Whoever catches it first will be the team's Seeker. Captain Flint, who is suspected to have troll blood and is taller than Snape, explained with a walnut-sized, golden metal ball with a pair of small silver wings. Okay, let's start now. Flint let go, and the golden snitch flew out at a super fast speed, and Malfoy and George followed closely behind. The golden snitch is very fast and very flexible. Even if you catch up with it, it can easily leave you behind with a turn, just like Malfoy at this time. Because the flying broom accelerated too fast, there was no time to brake when the golden snitch turned, and it flew a long way before turning back. But George was different. When the golden snitch turned, he immediately controlled the flying broom to turn, and the inertia of the flying broom was completely twisted by the iron wire controlled by the magnetic force. After completely catching up with the golden snitch, George stretched out his hand and grabbed it like lightning. The golden snitch dodged quickly, and George's magnetic control came into play again. Although the golden snitch is a magical product, it is also a metal product, so it will naturally be affected by his magnetic force. It would be too obvious to force it to stop, but who can see it if it slightly affects the speed? Because of George's magnetic force, the reaction speed of the golden snitch slowed down by 1 second, and in that second, George had already firmly grasped it in his hand. So fast, less than a minute. Seeing the golden snitch being caught by George, Snape and the team members below were also shocked. Although this is not a formal game, without the interference of the two teams' players and the Quaffle and Bludger, the difficulty of catching the golden snitch is greatly reduced, but catching it in 1 minute is too fast. You should know that in previous Quidditch games, there is a record of catching the golden snitch in 3 months at the latest, which shows how difficult it is to catch it. Harry, if George becomes the Slytherin Seeker, you're done. Among the 3 people who were peeking, Ron looked at Harry with sympathy, and Harry also had a bitter face. But Hermione next to him said. But if George becomes the Seeker, Malfoy will definitely be pissed off, which seems not bad. Ron and Harry's eyes lit up when they heard this, and nodded in agreement. Seeing Malfoy get humiliated, this is of course also a very pleasant thing for them. I lost. The two landed, and Malfoy looked at the golden snitch in George's hand, and the whole person collapsed like a deflated balloon. From today on, he will definitely become a laughingstock of Slytherin and will also disappoint his father. Father spent so much money to make him a Seeker, so that he could compete with Harry, but he lost it. Since you want to be a Seeker so much, then you can be one. George returned the golden snitch to Flint and said to the dejected Malfoy. Malfoy instantly raised his head and looked at George with incredible eyes. Snape and others also looked at George with surprise, not understanding what he was doing. I think whether it is a Seeker, a Chaser, a Beater, or a Goalkeeper, they are all equally important, and I have the confidence to win honor for Slytherin. But I just tried it, and the Seeker seems a bit boring and not challenging. George shrugged, and then looked at Malfoy with a smile. And I don't like to deprive others of their dreams. The eyes of the other players looking at George softened a lot. Thank you. Malfoy was silent for a few seconds and thanked George for the first time. He used to dislike George because the other party not only stole all his limelight, but also openly mocked him. But now, he suddenly felt that George didn't seem to disgust him so much, and he was a little grateful to George in his heart. After all, George was really amazing. In this case, he was willing to give him some face and let him survive. As Slytherins, we should help each other and work hard for the honor of Slytherin, right? George patted Malfoy on the shoulder, and this time Malfoy did not show any disgust on his face. Little Malfoy, hold it. Slytherin is like this. If you are a weak person, even if you show goodwill, the other party will just think you are easy to bully. But if you are strong enough, he will admire you and be willing to follow you from the bottom of his heart. Is Malfoy a very evil person? Of course not, he is just a proud child, and his nature is actually kinder than his two followers. Because the other party was looking for trouble first, he deliberately suppressed the other party. But if there is a chance to conquer, it is also good. The Malfoy family is quite prestigious among pure bloods, and there may be many places to use before Voldemort is resurrected. As for seekers, beaters, chasers, and keepers, there is really no difference in his eyes. On the contrary, he actually thinks that chasers are easier to improve his reputation than seekers. In a normal game, the seeker is the one who attracts the most attention. Because the game is not over until the seeker catches the snitch, and the seeker who catches the snitch can add a full 150 points to the entire team. In most cases, as long as the level of the two teams is not too different, the score difference will not be 150 points. So it is generally assumed that whichever team's seeker catches the snitch wins. If he, as a chaser, can pull the score to more than 150 points before the seeker catches the snitch, then he will be more dazzling than the seeker. This is also a very rare thing in the history of Quidditch at Hogwarts. Of course, what he did was effective for the inexperienced young Malfoy, but it would definitely not work against an old-timer like the elder Malfoy. The elder Malfoy was not very loyal to Voldemort. Well said, what Slytherin needs most is unity. Since George gave up voluntarily, Malfoy will be the seeker and George will be the chaser. Snape rarely showed his smile that was uglier than crying. As the Dean of Slytherin, he was naturally very happy to see such a harmonious scene, and his evaluation of George also rose to a higher level. It is really rare to have such a broad mind and ideas at this age. If he had the same mind and ideas as George, instead of spending all his time studying the dark arts, he wouldn't have let the damn Potter take advantage of Lily. You guys train well. After Snape left, everyone started Quidditch training. George, as a new chaser, also showed his superb skills in chasing. The seeker is to catch the golden snitch, the goalkeeper is to guard the goal, the beater is to hit the bludger to interfere with the opponent's players, and the chaser is to grab the quaffle and then shoot. This shot can be made with hands, feet, or a flying broom, as long as no magic is used. George's physical fitness is comparable to that of Captain Flint, who has the blood of a troll, but because of his body, he is much more flexible than him, plus he has absolute control over the flying broom. So basically, from grabbing the ball to dodging, to shooting, it is all done in one go. Chapter 45. A Roaring Letter to Leon. After joining the Slytherin team, George's life began to calm down. Daily score sweeping, daily study and research of magic, daily going to the library to scan books, improving his understanding of magic, and daily chasing teachers of various subjects to ask magic. As for Quidditch training, because of his superb skills, Snape allowed him to go less. As time went by, his magical knowledge and magic level also grew rapidly. He had almost mastered the first-year spells and began to learn the second-year content in advance. More than 2 months passed in a flash, and time slowly came to October. The weather began to get colder, and many little wizards caught a cold. Fortunately, the school doctor Ms. Pomfrey made a kind of stimulant. After drinking it, smoke would come out of the ears for several hours, but the effect was also immediate, and the cold could be easily cured. George sat by the window in the library, reading a book quietly at this time. It was drizzling outside the window, and from time to time, little witches in the library would look up and secretly look at him. With the rich meals at Hogwarts in the past few months, he is no longer as thin as before. It's time, you can go back. The thin and old librarian, Mrs. Pants, stood up and said to all the young wizards who were still reading in the library. George looked at the time. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening, and the library was about to close. He borrowed the books he had not finished reading, left the library, and planned to go back to the Slytherin common room to continue reading. At the same time, it was 8 o'clock in the morning in the Marvel world, and George's body had already ridden a motorcycle to the Bronx. Tony Stark has been kidnapped for almost 3 months, and it is estimated that he will escape back soon. In the past 3 months, Leon has completely turned the Cheeble family into the Leon family. So the previous plan should also be prepared. In fact, because of the previous car change and the meals in the past few months, Gabriella and Wolverine's savings are almost gone. He really needs to make money, and the children are in urgent need of school. These children in the laboratory have been trained to be killers since childhood. They have never received normal education and lack common sense. Gabriella is just an ordinary nurse with limited education. Isa is a driver with no education and is still trying to learn how to fly a plane. Wolverine can teach combat and history, but not so much in other aspects. Caliban originally relied on his ability to do black market business because he had no education. The most comprehensive one is Professor X, who graduated from Harvard University at the age of 16, and also went to Oxford University and Columbia University, and obtained multiple doctoral degrees in biology, psychology, and other fields. But he is in poor health and needs to take medicine frequently. Most of the time, he stays in the EEG room to prevent sudden epilepsy. On the rooftop of the dance hall in the Bronx, George took out an ordinary letter and put it on the ground, then waved his hands quickly to cast a spell. After the magic was imprinted on the envelope, he picked up the envelope and recorded what he wanted to say. Yes, he was making a roaring letter at this time. He didn't spend every day in the library in vain. In addition to learning magic, he also spent time learning some alchemy, that is, how to make magic items. He naturally couldn't master difficult magic items like wands, flying brooms, magic cars, and door keys so quickly, but simple ones like howling letters were easy to get started. After making a howling letter, he pinned a pin on it and waited quietly on the rooftop. About half an hour later, the triumphant Leon, holding a cigar, walked out of the dance hall with a group of younger brothers and got into the extended Lincoln parked at the door. At this time, George also used his ability to control the pin, flew out of the rooftop with the howling letter, and slid in when the car door was about to close. During this time, he thought carefully that he should be more cautious about people like Leon who are in the underground world, at least before his strength can ignore modern firearms. So if possible, try not to contact too frequently and keep the sense of mystery as much as possible. The unknown is usually the most terrifying. In this way, even if Leon encounters threats in the future, as long as it is not a fatal threat, he should not dare to betray him. Because he is too mysterious in Leon's eyes, once betrayed, he does not know how terrible the revenge will be, so it is safer. A letter. Leon was about to close the door, and suddenly found a letter squeezed in through the seam of the car and fell on his legs, which was also a bit confusing. But after seeing the name on the envelope, his pupils shrank instantly, so he quickly opened the door and looked outside. "Sir, what's wrong?" the younger brother in charge of driving asked with some confusion. Leon turned his head and looked around, and found that there were only his younger brothers around, and there was no one else. He took a deep breath and sat back in the car and ordered. "It's okay, you get off the car and wait for me first, I want to be alone in the car." Although the younger brother driving didn't understand what was going on, he still got off the car honestly. Leon picked up the letter in his hand. There was only one word on the envelope, that is death. More than 2 months ago, he was almost killed, and a mysterious man called Death saved him. Now he has finally cleared away all obstacles, including the remnants led by Cheeble's son, Cheeble the Younger, and completely transformed the Cheeble family into the Leon family. He also became one of the 13 most powerful people in the Bronx underground world. But the god of death never showed up, which became a headache for him. On the one hand, he was sincerely grateful for the other party's life-saving grace and wanted to repay him. On the other hand, he was also very afraid of such a mysterious guy who could kill Cheeble at will. Because that means that it seems just as easy for the other party to kill him. This is also one of the reasons why he always takes a group of younger brothers with him when he goes out. People are like this. When they are younger brothers, they don't think so much in their hearts, and they are not so afraid of death. But when they become the boss, the one who is high above, they start to think a lot and start to fear death. Picking up the envelope, he stretched out his hand and opened it carefully, but what puzzled him was that the envelope was empty and there was no letter. Just the next second, he opened his mouth in surprise and froze on the spot. Because the envelope suddenly flew out of his hand, floating in the air and turned into a mouth that spoke. "Leon, wait for me on the rooftop at 12 o'clock tonight." After that, the mouth bit itself into pieces and fell down. It took Leon 10 seconds to react, then he took a deep breath and murmured. "What kind of existence is this gentleman? Is he a god, or a demon from hell?" At this time, he remembered the wish he made before his death on the rooftop, and couldn't help shuddering. Chapter 46. The Carlson family is in trouble. At midnight, Leon walked onto the rooftop alone. The moon was very round tonight, and the bright moonlight fell on the rooftop, which made his nervous heart relax a little. Facing a being who could kill him at any time, even though he knew that the other party was unlikely to kill him, otherwise there would be no need to go to great lengths to save him, he was still a little frightened in his heart. Here it comes. A familiar voice sounded, and he looked up in the direction of the voice. At some point, George, wearing a death mask, had appeared above his head, and was now walking slowly down from the sky in the moonlight. That scene was like a god. "Mr. Death, what do you want?" Leon bent down subconsciously. After landing, George looked up and down at Leon and said, "If I kill all the leaders of the other 12 families in the Bronx, can you take over all their territories?" He thought about it, and the cash alone was still too little. If he cooperated with Leon to take over the entire underground world of the Bronx, then he could share it with Leon. This is what it means to really make a big fortune, and you won't have to worry about money anymore. As for whether the Bronx becomes better or worse after Leon rules the entire underground world of the Bronx, it has nothing to do with him. To be honest, no matter how hard life is for the people here, it has nothing to do with him. He is not a superhero who thinks about saving people and saving all living beings every day. It's good enough for him to save himself. What? Leon's legs softened when he heard this, and he almost sat down on the ground in fear. He didn't expect George's first words to be so fierce. He just turned the Cheeble family into the Leon family, and asked him to take over the entire underground world of the Bronx. None of the 12 families are easy to deal with. However, when he saw the seriousness in George's eyes and knew that he was not joking, he couldn't help but hold back his saliva. To be honest, this was really tempting for him, but in the end he smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Impossible, with my strength, I can't take on so many families, even if I can, I can't take them." "Why?" George raised his eyebrows. He could understand the former, but what did the latter mean? Leon was afraid of making George angry, so he quickly explained. "You may not understand that the reason why there are 13 families in the Bronx is that it was decided by King Jinping, the king of the entire American underground world. Even if you kill all the people in their 12 families, I can't take over all their territories. In the end, there will be 12 new families to replace the previous 12 families. Jinping will not allow a family that affects his status to appear in the Bronx." "Jinping, what if you kill him?" George frowned slightly. He knew Jinping, but he didn't expect Jinping to have such a great influence on the underground world. Even the number of families in the Bronx was controlled by Jinping. But Jinping was an ordinary person after all. Even if his physical strength was close to the human limit, it would not be too difficult for him to kill the other party. The main thing was that it was not easy to find the other party. Hearing George say that killing Kingpin is as easy as killing a chicken, Leon couldn't help but take a breath. "Well, even if you kill Kingpin, it won't work. This matter is not that simple. Once Kingpin dies, the whole underground world will be in chaos. At that time, the major families will inevitably fight, not only in the Bronx, but also in other places. More powerful families. With my strength, it is impossible to protect the entire Bronx, and even the current territory may be threatened. Then forget it." George felt that what Leon said made sense. Unless he cleaned up the entire underground world in the United States, Leon might be killed one day when he was away. And he didn't have the time and energy to do that. Doing so would inevitably attract the attention of major organizations and forces, which would also go against his original intention. Making money just to have more time to settle down and study magic, spending a lot of time and energy on clearing the underground world would be putting the cart before the horse. Then, just solve one family and swallow up his territory and property, is there any problem? George spoke again. This time, Leon did not refuse immediately, but thought for a few seconds and replied. "If it is just one family, there is no problem. I will divide some of it to support a small family. As long as the number of 13 families remains unchanged, Jinping will at most send someone to reprimand them. This kind of thing has happened in the Bronx before. The 13 families jointly manage the Bronx. There are many cases of fighting for interests. It is not uncommon for small families to defeat large families. For such a fight, Jinping has always been happy to see it happen. On the contrary, if the 13 families are of the same blood, it is not what Jinping wants to see. Okay, then you provide a family that doesn't get along with you. In the next few days, I will let their leaders die accidentally. At that time, you will take over their territory with people, and the benefits will be divided equally in the future. George nodded. Since it is impossible to wipe out all 12 families, then destroying one and taking all the benefits will definitely be a lot. At least it should be more than his previous plan to just rob the cash of the 12 families. The Carlson family, their territory is right next to us, and they often have friction with us. This time, they took advantage of the internal fight between me and Little Cheeble to rob us of a lot of our territory. I originally planned to fight with them and take back those territories. If their leaders suddenly die, then I am confident that I can take over all their territories. At this time, Leon's expression became a little excited. Let alone a 50-50 split of the benefits, even if it was all given to George, he would have no objection. You know, George did save his life, and during this period, the Carlson family took advantage of the fire to rob him, and he lost several brothers who had a good relationship with him. Originally, he had no intention of letting the other party go. It's just that now after experiencing the internal fight, the strength is much weaker than before, and it is definitely impossible to fight, and at most it will disgust the other party. But now it's different. This mysterious Mr. Death is willing to take action, so this revenge can definitely be avenged. Collect the intelligence of this family, and I will come to get it tomorrow night. After leaving a word, George jumped off the rooftop and disappeared into the darkness. Although it was a little different from his original plan, the result was not too bad. He is not a god, and it is impossible for him to calculate everything. Even if he has many advantages in intelligence, some mistakes are inevitable. But he thinks this is also normal. If the plan changes, then make a new plan. The important thing is that he must have the ability to change the plan calmly and still achieve the goal smoothly. So in the final analysis, strength is the foundation. With strength, even if the world is in chaos and completely deviates from the plots he knows, it is no big deal. Chapter 47. Combination of psychic powers and soul-reading spells. It seems that we can't give up on Tony Stark. After leaving the rooftop, George did not return to school, but rode his beloved scooter straight to Manhattan, because he decided to find time to go to the Middle East to rescue Tony. Before, he considered that taking Wolverine to rescue Tony might attract the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it is better to rely on oneself than on others. So he decided to find an agent, then rob all the families in the Bronx, and then invest in Stark stocks to make a fortune. But now the situation has changed, and he has thought about it carefully during this period of time, and he thought of a problem that he had ignored before. That is, can Tony Stark really escape by himself? If it is a movie universe, there will be no problem, but this is not a movie universe. There are mutants such as Wolverine and Professor X here. I don't know which Marvel universe it is. If Tony Stark fails to escape and dies in that cave, he will lose all his money. How to ensure that buying Stark stocks will definitely make money? He felt that it would be safest if he went to the Middle East in person, rescued Tony Stark, and then immediately asked Leon to use all his cash to buy Stark's stocks. As for the problem of being discovered by S.H.I.E.L.D., he had also thought about it. He was no longer the same as before, only knowing how to open the lock, not developing much ability, and bringing a group of cumbersome novices with him. Now, he had Leon, the boss of one of the 13 families in the Bronx, as a partner, who could easily create a real identity for him as a disguise. The magnetic force had been developed to the point where it could deflect sniper bullets for long-range sniping, and he had mastered all the spells for the first grade, as well as some spells outside the textbook. Therefore, he could go to the Middle East alone to rescue Tony Stark without being discovered by others. If possible, he could also find Tony Stark to cooperate secretly, so that he would have partners in both the black and white worlds, and many things would be easier to handle in the future. Tony won't die so easily. The military has not given up searching for Tony until now. And even if Tony really has an accident, Stark Group has the best engineers in the world, and our weapons are still the best in the world. So don't worry about the future of Stark Group, please believe us. In the most upscale banquet hall in New York, Obadiah Stane stood on the podium of the banquet, talking endlessly about saving the stock price of Stark Group. After the banquet, he sat in a luxury car driven by his bodyguards on the way to his Long Island villa, and couldn't help cursing. These damn short-sighted ghosts, do they really think that without Tony Stark, the group can't develop better weapons? He knew that if Tony Stark had an accident, the group's stock price would fall, but he didn't expect it to fall so much. If the stock price was not saved, even if Tony really died, the Stark group would be completely controlled by him, and it would shrink greatly. And the 10 rings, I will kill them all sooner or later. How dare you blackmail me? Tony Stark was attacked in the Middle East because he hired the terrorist organization 10 Rings to eliminate Tony Stark and completely control the Stark group. As a result, the 10 Rings recognized Tony Stark's identity and immediately asked for a high price that even he couldn't afford. Have you found the location of the 10 Rings? Boss, we can only lock on the desert near Baklon province in Afghanistan, but it will take another half a month to find the specific location in the desert. The bodyguard who was driving replied. After determining the location, send someone to kill Tony and the 10 Rings together. Obadiah Stan's eyes were full of viciousness. Dare to threaten him, then die. Okay, here comes the work. At this time, George saw Obadiah Stan's car coming from a distance with a telescope, and immediately landed beside the road, and then began to chant to the ground. Quickly soften. A blue magic beam hit the ground, and the originally hard ground immediately began to soften and collapse. When Obadiah Stan's high-speed car passed here, it was directly flipped out because of the collapse of the ground, and fell on the side of the road, sliding for a long distance. After investigating for a few days, he knew that this road was basically the only way for Obadiah Stan to go home, so he squatted here. As for why he didn't squat at his home? It was mainly because he wanted to create a car accident to hospitalize Obadiah Stan, which would also reduce the stock price of Stark Group. Secondly, because there were many bodyguards in Obadiah Stan's villa, it was still a bit troublesome for him to obtain intelligence without being noticed. Walking to the overturned car, Obadiah and the bodyguard inside were obviously seriously injured and were trying to unbuckle their seat belts and crawl out. Good evening, Mr. Obadiah. George squatted on the ground and waved to the two people inside with a smile. The bodyguard was very alert and immediately gave up, unbuckled his seat belt. Instead, he took out the pistol from his waist and was about to shoot George. However, George was prepared and had already started to prepare magic on the way over. Fainted. A blue magic light hit the bodyguard one step ahead of time, and the bodyguard fainted with his head tilted. Seeing this, Obadiah's pupils shrank, and he quickly said, "No matter who asks you to kill me, I will give you 10 times more than him. I am a little tempted, but I am not here to kill you." George smiled and looked at Obadiah, while activating his psychic ability and casting a spell. Legislatives. A month ago, he had asked the Legilimency Master Snape about the magic of Legilimency, but Snape did not agree to teach him at that time, thinking that it was too early for him to learn this magic. And such a difficult magic is not something he can master now. In order to learn this magic, he lied that he was a natural Legilimency who could read people's thoughts when they were not on guard, and could communicate with magical animals, so he wanted to learn this magic in advance to better control his abilities. After some verification, it was confirmed that he seemed to be a natural Legilimency, and Snape was finally willing to teach him the Legilimency spell. Although after a month of practice, he could only use this spell in a preliminary way, but with his second-level psychic ability, he could already forcefully read a person's mind. Especially when he was afraid. "Tell me, where is Tony Stark?" 2 sharp blades flew out from George's sleeves and hovered between Obadiah's eyes. "Otherwise, you will soon lose your eyes, then your ears, and finally your life." Chapter 48. 8 Tracking Spells. I don't know what you are talking about. How do I know where Tony is? If I knew, I would definitely find someone to rescue him. When he disappeared, the group's stock price plummeted. Obadiah explained with a look of horror on his face, and there was no flaw in his expression and tone. If George hadn't used Legilimency and telepathy at the same time to read Obadiah's mental activities, he would have been deceived. Even when his life is threatened, he can still act so realistically. This guy is not a bad guy. Also, if he was kind, he wouldn't have tricked Tony into playing tricks, and he wouldn't have wiped out all the people from the 10 Rings gang. In the desert near Baklon province in Afghanistan, it seems you don't know the exact location. Stopping Legilimency and telepathy, George frowned. He originally thought that Obadiah would know the location of the 10 Rings gang's lair, but it turned out that the other party had also been looking for it and only found a rough idea. "How do you know?" Hearing George's words, Obadiah was stunned. And George was too lazy to explain to him any more, raised his hand and started to cast a spell on Obadiah. Everything is forgotten. This is the only spell he has learned from Lockhart in the past 3 months. Although it cannot be used as powerfully as Lockhart, it can still be done by simply erasing a small section of ordinary people's memories. After casting the forgetting spell on Obadiah, he also cast it on the unconscious bodyguard. After settling all this, he left on his motorcycle that had been parked on the roadside for a long time. Not long after George left, the bodyguard and Obadiah woke up leisurely, but they only remembered that the car had overturned, and then they fainted, but they had no memory of George. "Damn it, I'm going to fire you, loser, call someone to rescue us immediately, and block the news immediately so that the outside world won't know that I was in a car accident." The next day, the news about Obadiah's injuries in the car accident was reported by those omnipotent New York reporters. Of course, these reporters also have to thank the kind person who put this breaking news on their desk. Executive CEO Tony Stark disappeared, and the main person in charge, Obadiah, was injured in a car accident. The share price of Stark Group suddenly fell to the bottom. However, as the world's largest group company, these are influential, but not fatal. It is just the difference between making more money and making less money. It's not easy to find someone in such a big desert. At the entrance of Hogwarts Castle, George looked at the snowflakes falling outside. After thinking for a moment, he turned and walked towards the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. "It seems that we need to go to the restricted book area to look for it. If you want to find traces of Tony Stark in the desert, even if the desert is not very big, it is still not an easy task. So he needs a magic that can find people. He has not seen this kind of magic in the normal bookshelf area of the library. He can only go to the restricted book area to see if there is any. Normally, many wizards' spells are inspired by the abilities of magical animals, such as the legilimency spell, which was developed based on the cat and leopard who was born with legilimency. He didn't believe that no wizard had developed the magical tracking technique of the owl, and he remembered that Newt was very good at tracking magic and could even recreate the scene at that time. Tonks once mentioned during dinner that she was practicing a tracking spell to hunt down criminal dark wizards. But since there is a tracking spell, there will be an anti-tracking spell. He remembered that Sirius was proficient in anti-tracking spells. Aurors could not lock Sirius's position at all, and even owls could block it. But people in the Marvel world don't know how to counter tracking spells. As long as he can master a tracking spell, he can quickly find Tony Stark in the desert. To enter the Forbidden Book area, you need a teacher's approval note. Other teachers, even Snape, who currently values him the most, would not be able to give him an approval note to enter the restricted book area. After all, there is too much dangerous black magic and dangerous magic knowledge. If one is not too greedy, he may go astray and hurt himself. So he could only go to Lockhart, a teacher who could easily get approval slips with just a few compliments. Sure enough, because he had deliberately built a close relationship in the past few months, he got the approval slip to go to the restricted book area with almost no effort. "Go, but don't mess with the precious magic book inside, or I won't let you go." Mrs. Pants looked at Lockhart's approval note in George's hand, frowned, and let him into the restricted book area with a warning. Compared with the thousands of magic books outside, there are far fewer books in the restricted book area, but they are arranged more neatly. It is obvious that few people come in to read. George skipped the books that recorded seductive black magic and began to look for the magic books that recorded tracking magic. It wasn't that he didn't want to read it, but the moment he entered the forbidden book area, his telepathy told him that someone was secretly watching him. If his prediction was correct, the person spying on him was most likely Dumbledore, perhaps using some kind of magic he didn't know, or a magic item. Ever since Voldemort found information about Horcruxes in the Forbidden Zone, it is understandable that Dumbledore has paid special attention to the Forbidden Zone and implemented some surveillance measures to prevent similar situations from happening again. As long as he doesn't touch dangerous black magic books, it won't be a big problem. After learning the tracking spell, if he is asked, he can just use the excuse of finding his biological parents to fool him. When Dumbledore is not in school, it won't be too late for him to go to the Forbidden Book area to learn those black magic. Found it. After searching for a while, he really found a magic book called 8 Ways to Find Lost People. After flipping through it, he found that it actually recorded 8 different tracking spells. There are tracking spells that will show arrows after casting the spell, tracking that will show footprints after casting, and advanced tracking like newts that will even reveal the shadow of the person. The most powerful one is the tracking involving time magic, which can directly go back in time to see what happened in the past, so as to know everything the person being tracked did. However, since this tracking technique was created, there is no record of any wizard who has learned it. At George's current level, the advanced tracking technique is definitely impossible. He only needs to learn the simplest one, the tracking technique with arrows. There are no buildings in the desert that block the view, and the tracking technique with arrows is enough for him to find Tony Stark. He left the restricted area with the book about the tracking spell, registered with Madame Pants, and returned to the Slytherin common room to study the simplest tracking spell. At the same time, the main body of the Marvel main world also began to purge the top leaders of the Carlson family. Chapter 49. Was it murder or an accident? At night, in the Bronx, in the most luxurious nightclub in the Carlson family's territory. Deafening music, men and women twisting their bodies crazily, and the revealing and seductive performances on the stage, as well as the drug addicts in the corner who spent money to buy various contraband and were high. George sat at the bar and ordered a glass of wine. While drinking it intentionally or unintentionally, he looked around for his target. According to the information given by Leon, this nightclub controlled by the Carlson family is now managed by Carlson's youngest son, Carlson Jr., and Carlson Jr. comes here almost every night. Carlson Jr.'s biggest hobby is women, especially young and energetic women, preferably those who have not yet entered society or have just entered society. With his status, as long as he spends some money, a large number of young and energetic female college students are willing to accompany him, but he likes to have that sense of conquest. So coming to his own nightclub every day is also to find prey. Once he has a target, he will let his men take it back to his own exclusive room in the nightclub by force. If he is very satisfied, he will do it himself. Even the craziest one was to perform in the middle of the nightclub dance hall in full view of the public. Afterwards, as the heir of the Carlson family, the girl from an ordinary family with no background could only swallow her anger for the safety of herself and her family after being given some money and threatened. If she dared to resist, she would be drowned. Even some people with some background did not dare to confront the Carlson family head-on. Those who really couldn't afford to offend the Carlson family also knew what this nightclub was and would never come here to play. Those who came to his nightclub were either veterans, the group of people who came here to have fun, or young people who didn't know much about his nightclub. They were too naive and stupid. Some were curious, and some wanted to meet a beautiful love in the nightclub, meet a tall, handsome, and rich handsome guy, and spend a wonderful night. However, the cruel reality would teach them how to be a person and let them understand that staying away from danger is the best protection for themselves. Here we go. Seeing a sturdy bald man at the door, walking into the nightclub with a group of younger brothers, and sitting in the exclusive luxury booth of the nightclub, George gradually stood up. It was easy to kill Carlson, he could control the blade and cut Carlson's throat with one knife, but that was not what he wanted. Because it would cause chaos, if it was not good, the senior members of the Carlson family would be scared and hide, and then things would become troublesome. And the senior members of the 13 families were assassinated one after another, which would also cause a sensation. So if possible, it would be better not to be so direct, and to reasonably let these senior members die, making everything look like an accident, which is the result he wants. He didn't want others to associate this with superpowers. Even when he saved Leon last time, others thought that Leon killed Cheeble on the rooftop himself, instead of having the help of this mysterious man. It seems that I'm lucky today and found a little top-notch. Little Carlson had just sat down for a while when he found a satisfactory prey in the central dance floor. She looks good, tall, and the key is her temperament. It can be seen that she is a novice who came here for the first time. She can't dance freely. She is probably still a student. Boss, she seems to be leaving. Do you want us to go over and tie her up for you? The younger brother next to him was very good at reading her expression and asked immediately. However, Carlson put down his glass and waved his hand. I want to go in person this time. She reminds me of the girl last time. It's a pity that the girl committed suicide in the end. Otherwise, I could come more times. It seems that the boss plans to do it on the dance floor this time. Hearing Carlson's words, the younger brothers also became excited. What kind of boss leads what kind of younger brothers? They are all the same kind of stuff. Carlson got up and walked quickly into the dance floor, and stopped the girl in the noisy dance floor before she left. First, there was a verbal teasing, and then he started to make moves. The girl wanted to resist, but how could she be a match for the tall Carlson, and Carlson's threat also made the girl very scared. As for the companions who came with the girl, they had been surrounded by Carlson's men and could not move. However, just when Carlson was about to succeed, George in the crowd also came to the position closest to Carlson. Tarantella dance. A small blue light shot at Carlson inconspicuously in the colorful dance floor. After being hit by the blue light, Carlson suddenly stopped his hands and his legs began to twitch uncontrollably, as if he was dancing a very difficult quick-step dance. And his younger brothers saw that the boss was actually excited and dancing at this time, thinking that the boss had some new tricks, and immediately cheered loudly for the boss's dance. The girl whose clothes were torn half was also stunned, not knowing why the bully in front of her suddenly danced. Even more confused was Carlson himself, because he himself didn't know why he suddenly danced. Legs stand still. The dancing spell was followed by the leg-locking spell. Carlson seemed to have accidentally tripped while dancing, and he fell backwards because his center of balance was unstable. If he just fell, it would be nothing. The key point is that when he fell, a nail on the body of a nearby gangster wearing a leather jacket with rivets suddenly broke and fell to the ground, rolling to the place where Carlson fell. Squeak! The nail pointed upwards and pierced Carlson's back of the head fiercely, bleeding profusely, and he died on the spot. He's dead! He's dead! For a moment, the dance floor was full of screams, everyone fled in all directions, and George quietly left the nightclub with the crowd. The nail was naturally not an accident, but was controlled by his ability. 2 hours later, the grief-stricken old Carlson was in the dance hall, listening to the report of his men. Through monitoring and investigation, it can be confirmed that this was indeed just an accident, not a deliberate murder. I told him a long time ago to be restrained, but he just didn't listen, and he deserved it. All those men who protected him should be sunk into the sea to feed the fish. Confirming that his son was not murdered, but died in an accident, old Carlson sighed, got up with a cane and left the nightclub. The death of his son made him sad, but what troubled him more was the impact of the death of the heir. Originally, his son was the heir, and the family leaders were willing to assist his son. Recently, they also took over some of the territory of the Cheeble family. Everything was going in a good direction. But now that the only heir is dead, the family leaders will definitely be ready to move. If he doesn't handle it properly later, the whole family may be in chaos. At that time, everyone will want to compete for his position, which will definitely be 10 times more chaotic than the Cheeble family. If one thing goes wrong, he will have to pay for it. My health is not bad, I can suppress it. It seems that I have to quickly determine the new heir. Chapter 50. Heading to Afghanistan. The next day, dark clouds and light rain covered the whole of New York. In the high-end cemetery in the Bronx, old Carlson leaned on a cane and looked at his son's tombstone. The sadness of the old man sending the young man away came to his mind, and a few tears could not help but flow down his fierce face. Let's go, there are more important things to do today. Old Carlson wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and under the escort of his younger brothers, he turned and walked out of the cemetery. In front of a tombstone not far from them, George was also casting a spell. Oolong out of the hole. As the spell took shape, a grey-black mamba snake appeared in front of him, and then quickly got into the bushes and swam towards the location of old Carlson. About a minute later, George heard the screams of old Carlson and the panicked exclamations of his younger brothers. The nearest hospital to this cemetery is also 30 minutes away. With old Carlson's body, he can't survive more than 15 minutes after being bitten by a black mamba snake. Once old Carlson dies, the Carlson family will be in chaos. The senior executives will naturally take action to compete for the position of the boss. At that time, he can take advantage of the situation to eliminate most of those senior executives. Even if a sniper rifle is used, others will no longer doubt it, and just think that these senior executives are looking for someone to fight each other. 3 days later, at night, on the rooftop. The Carlson family has been fighting internally in the past few days, and its strength has been greatly damaged. I plan to take action tomorrow and eat up all their territory. Leon looked at George and said respectfully. He was also quite shocked that George had disintegrated most of the Carlson family, one of the 13 families, in just a few days. It's nothing to say that those who were shot later, but the accidental death of Carlson and his son at the beginning really scared him. Because even if he knew that it was George who did it, there was no trace of human intervention. Everyone thought that Carlson and his son were too unlucky, so one accidentally fell to death and the other accidentally died of snake bites. Sometimes he wondered, if George wanted to kill him, would he also die in an accident like Carlson and his son without knowing it? This was simply too terrible, just like Satan wanted to take your soul away, no matter how you resisted, you could not avoid it. So he had a deeper fear of George in his heart. Where should I transfer the money to you? No need to transfer it to me, put it in your account, I will take it from you when I need it. George nodded and replied. He didn't have an account and couldn't transfer the money. If he transferred it to Wolverine and Gabriella's account, it would be easy to expose his identity. It's better to put it with Leon, take some cash when you need it, and let Leon pay directly when you need a large sum of money. I believe that after this series of things, Leon should not dare to think about his money. By the way, after taking over Carlson's territory, cash out as much liquidity as possible. If necessary, mortgage everything that can be mortgaged to the bank for a loan, and then wait for my call. Ah! Hearing George's words, Leon was also stunned, obviously not understanding what was going on. George did not explain too much, just said. If you believe me, then do as I say, you can make a lot of money. If you don't believe me, I won't force you, as long as you use all my share to buy Stark Group's stocks. There is no need to tell Leon about his plan to save Tony Stark, and it would be bad to say too much. In the end, as long as he makes money, Leon will naturally trust him more and more. Believe, I absolutely believe you. Leon immediately patted his chest and replied. This is not because he is afraid of George's words against his will, but because he really believes in the various magical abilities George has shown. He thinks that maybe George has the ability to predict the future, and knowing that Stark Group's stocks may rise sharply, he will let him buy them quickly. If that was true, he would really make a fortune, even more than if he had annexed the Carlson family. Although they were one of the 13 families in the Bronx and were very successful in this area, they were actually just ants and elephants compared to the world-class behemoth Stark Group. You know, the Bronx is just the poorest and most chaotic district in New York, while the Stark Group is the richest group on Earth. One day later, the newly emerged Leon family in the Bronx went all out to sweep the Carlson family, whose strength had reached a freezing point due to internal fighting, and took over 80% of the Carlson family's territory, leaving only 20% for the last surviving senior executive of the Carlson family. 2 days later, Leon frantically raised funds and even mortgaged his extended Lincoln to the bank, showing his full determination and trust in George. 3 days later, the playground of the mutant school slowly opened, and an invisible fighter slowly took off and flew towards Baklon province, Afghanistan. There was no Wolverine on the X-fighter, only George and Isha who was flying the plane. Originally, George was planning to ask Leon to send someone to take him to Afghanistan. But when he returned to school to discuss with Professor X, Issa said that she could already fly the X-fighter smoothly. It was Professor X who gave Issa some professional guidance when he was not sick. Since Issa could fly the X-fighter to take him to Afghanistan, that would be the best. The fighter plane could go directly to the desert, saving time and not worrying about exposing his identity by changing cars. As for why he didn't bring Wolverine to help, the main reason is that he is now strong enough to deal with the terrorists of the Ten Rings, and Wolverine was once a famous figure, so Tony should be able to recognize him. Even if he can't recognize him, he will definitely know it after he goes back and asks Jarvis to check. He doesn't want Tony to know his identity yet. The more people know his identity, the more risk of exposure. Even if the other party is Iron Man, he should be more cautious. Wait for another 2 years, his strength will be stronger, Professor X and Wolverine will be able to recover their strength, and those mutant children will be able to skillfully use their abilities to fight, so they don't have to be as careful as they are now. The speed of the X-fighter is very fast. It flew to the desert outside Baklon province, Afghanistan in just a few hours. Direction appears. As George's spell sounded, an arrow made of golden powder appeared in front of George. And as Isha's moving fighter plane moves, the arrow will also turn accordingly. However, this arrow can only point out the direction of the target in the east, west, south and north in a plane, and cannot distinguish up and down. It is okay to find people in this desert, but it is not very convenient in the city. Because there are tall buildings in the city, and the person you are looking for is on the 18th floor, and you are on the first floor, you can't find him no matter how the arrow points. This tracking spell is not suitable for complex terrain. For complex terrain, you still need to use a better one that can show movement footprints, but he hasn't learned it yet.